So good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for those of you that came back from yesterday's forum, and welcome to those of you that are attending for the first time. If you are attending for the first time, you'll notice that we have these fantastic bags over to my right. If you didn't get a bag yesterday, you're more than welcome to take one today. Lots of really good goodies inside the bag, and you won't want to miss them. Once again, let me introduce myself. My name is Patty Barron, and I'm the Director of Family Readiness at the Association of the United States Army. Everyone's been doing a great job of asking questions, and especially those of you online, so I welcome all of you online again. So keep up the good work, and don't be shy. We've got mics right in two spots in the middle aisle for your Q&A period. And for those of you online, if you will remember to just kind of jot down where you're asking the question from and who the question is directed to, we would appreciate that. Thank you. We're so grateful today that today's forum is sponsored by Kaplan University. Representing Kaplan is Meg O'Grady. Meg O'Grady is a senior leader with 25 years of experience developing and leading a broad spectrum of quality of life programs for both service members, veterans, and their families, both the government and private sectors. She is the Vice President, Military and Public Sector Solutions for Kaplan Higher and Professional Education, leading a team that helps military-affiliated students and government organizations reach important milestones in their educations and careers. She is a true leader and an inspiration to many people, and a good friend. Meg?
Good morning. It's so nice to see so many friends out here in the audience, and friends from, gosh, it's been 30 years now, I think. I just said that in public. Okay. So thank you, Patty, for that kind introduction. Thank you to AUSA for your tireless commitment to ensuring that soldiers and their families are well taken care of at every stage of their career. I'd also like to thank our distinguished panelists today for bringing their insights to the group. And finally, I'd like to thank Mrs. Milley and Mrs. Daly for being here and for their ongoing investment in the advocacy of military families. It's an honor for Kaplan University to support AUSA family programs. As an Army spouse of 20 years and the proud mom of an Army brat, I've experienced firsthand how our mobile military lifestyle can present a very real challenge to the education and career goals of our service members and their families. That's why I truly believe in the quality and the flexibility of the education we provide at Kaplan University, which is in the process of being acquired by Purdue University as part of their agenda to offer students a more affordable, accessible, and world-class education. We know that when a soldier is serving his or her country, so is their family. And we believe this service is an asset, not a detriment to educational and career goals. Almost 30% of our Kaplan University students are military affiliated, and more than 60% of our team that serve those students are veterans, reservists, guardmen, or military family members themselves. We value the training and experience and ethos that soldiers and their families bring to our classrooms. Their commitment to a mission bigger than themselves is abundantly clear in the spirit and dedication they devote to their studies. As a regionally accredited university, we're committed to providing educational opportunities to soldiers and their families that will serve them while they're in uniform and beyond. We know now more than ever, military families need or want to be two-income families. And we know that their education can be a key to the critical career and economic opportunities they desire. We're also proud to provide opportunities for our military students and spouses to successfully transition from education to career by partnering with such great organizations as AUSA, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Hiring Our Heroes program, the Armed Services YMCA, Thanks USA, and the National Military Family Association. Our commitment to Army families extends through the $12 million in scholarships that we've awarded to military spouses and veterans. And just yesterday, I had the honor to award 6 full scholarships to our best warriors from the Army. Through our professional military education, PME to degree program, soldiers receive quality education for the robust experience and education they complete within their service. And we believe our ability to ensure that every soldier and spouse can transition from active duty to a degree that will allow them to have a successful career. We've dedicated ourselves to work with all branches of the armed forces to identify and award credit for the valuable professional military education that all our service members receive. I'm proud to be a part of the Kaplan team and proud to support the readiness of our soldiers and their families through our participation at AUSA today. With that, I will turn it back to Patty.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, Kaplan. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Heather Leiby. And Heather came to work to the Army almost 16 years ago as a training and program specialist for Child and Youth Services in Ansbach, Germany. Yay. She has served as the CDC Director, ACS Mobilization Deployment and Stability Support Operations Program Manager at both the Garrison and Headquarters, an ACS Director, and more recently as the Volunteer Programs Branch Chief at Headquarters IMCOM ACS. She currently serves as the School Liaison Transition Specialist for Headquarters IMCOM CYS. She has an exciting curriculum to share with all of you. I've been waiting for this briefing myself because I think it's going to be really good to learn all of this. Heather?
Hello, good morning. Patty, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here to be able to share the work that my team has put together over the past 2 years. I'm honored to represent a team of people from across Army Family Programs to include Army Community Service, our Reserve Family Programs, and our National Guard, who together developed this training that you're going to see today. Before I begin and kind of get into the training itself, I just want to share a little bit more about the passion that went into this project. And I want to share it from my family's perspective. I grew up in a family that is military connected. I am a granddaughter of a World War II veteran and a Korea veteran, Air Force, a daughter of a former Marine who served in the Vietnam era, a sister of a Marine who served during OIF, and the wife of a soldier who also served during OIF. Not only did I have that sort of experience, so did the team that came together to put this project together. And so the passion for our families and ensuring that our family readiness groups have the best possible training is what we wanted to make sure you all were able to see today and the training that comes into the future. I had the question asked, how did you come up with REAL? So when I first started this project, I had a group of about 7 people, active component IMCOM, ACS representatives, because we were just simply going to update the OpReady training. And as we looked at the OpReady training as it currently exists, we realized that there were some areas that were challenging, as well as we learned a lot in the last 15 years when it comes to family readiness and how we serve our families and how we train our family readiness groups. We knew that Forces Command and TRADOC had recently put together an operations order that required for units to appoint family readiness liaisons because the Family Readiness Support Assistant program on the active duty side was dwindling due to finances and other things that were going on. We knew that our families were changing. We were no longer my grandmother's generation of spouses. We were families who were working, dual working families, dual military families, families who had legacy soldiers, families who were new to the military. All of these different things were going on, and so we had a changing face. As General Mattis talked yesterday about how our soldiers that stayed in the Army from the Vietnam era changed the Army, those families changed how family readiness came across in our Army and our other military services as well. It was a holistic change that began to take place. And so as we sat in this group, we said, well, what do we really want this to be? And somebody said, you know, people just want real training. They just want something that tells them what they're really supposed to do. And so we started with that, and the Army likes acronyms, and so we thought we'd come up with one too. And so we present to you the REAL training, Readiness Essentials for Army Leaders. If you can go to the next slide, please. So what I want to start with is what the curriculum looks like, and then we're going to dive into it a little bit. I'm actually going to give you some examples. So the idea behind this training was that it's a joint training, and it provides the core family readiness group training for across the Army. Okay, so we're not talking just active component, we're talking National Guard and Reserve, knowing that each of those components are going to have specific missions and are going to have specific pieces that they need to look at. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to provide a core language for family readiness across all components of the Army. So as a commander or a spouse transitions from one installation to another, from one component to another, that language is the same, the expectations are the same, and everybody is talking the same tactical language when it comes to family readiness as they do when it comes to soldier readiness. So we developed what you'll see here, these six different core trainings. So we start with foundations, which gives everybody that basic core training, the basic core language. So this is what an FRG is. This is how an FRG is structured. This is what family readiness is, and this is how the FRG is a tool that can support family readiness that the commander can leverage. As we looked at what we currently had in place, what we found was that there was no real specific, here commander is how your FRG, here's what the FRG structure is, here's the basics behind it, and here's how it really is going to help your overall troop readiness. So we put together the command training, which focuses on that bottom line of how does family readiness support troop readiness, and what are the pieces as a commander you would need to have in place to ensure that you have a great family readiness program that's going to provide the support needed based on the mission that you have. And then we looked and said, we don't really have anything for family readiness liaisons. We had put something together when Forces Command came to me and said, hey, we're going to put family readiness liaisons in the units. Can you help us develop something? So we had worked with Forces Command to develop a very basic training. From that, we developed this training utilizing what we'd put in place with Forces Command, as well as some additional training pieces that we thought were really important. And basically what we did is we started looking at what were those core aspects that we needed to make sure that anybody who is running a family readiness group would need to have. And what would that FRL, as the person who was liaisoning between the command and the family readiness group leadership team, need to know in order to support both their commander and their FRG leader. So we came up with the communications network. Communications is key to how our FRGs operate. The critical incidents, what is the FRG role when it comes to critical incidents, whether it be a casualty, it be a weather event, or it be something else that's going on where families are needing some additional assistance. Volunteer management, how do you take those volunteers and recruit volunteers, keep volunteers, recognize volunteers? I want to make sure that people had that. The resources that were out there in their community, how to leverage them. And then we did want to provide some information on non-mission essential activities, such as the informal fund and providing those social events that are so important to esprit de corps and developing social connections that we know are protective factors. So we began to really look at it from that perspective. We put that in the FRL training. Then the FRG leader training also mirrors that same, those same kind of blocks, but looking at it from the perspective of, as a volunteer who's been asked to lead a group to leverage family readiness and be that commander's face for family readiness, what were the pieces that those leaders needed to have? And then our key contact, looking very specifically, and many of you may know this as a key caller. This was one of the names we changed, and we changed it to be more relevant because today people aren't necessarily picking up the phone and calling. They're emailing, they're texting, they're getting on Facebook, they're going all different kinds of directions, and we want to give them that human connection. And as I talked with senior leaders at various places that I went, we talked about how the key contact was the glue to our families and that it really connected them into the unit. And so we wanted to make sure that we looked at that. And there we focused really on communication, because that's what that key contact is doing. They're out there reaching out to those families and they're providing that communication. And then a specific training for informal funds, which did not really exist in the OpReady. There was a module on informal funds, but it didn't go into the details. And what we had found was that there were a lot of installations that had developed various trainings. So we took those different trainings and developed something that really focused on the overall idea of the informal fund, what it was supposed to do, how it was supposed to be managed, and provided some real strong interactive activities for those informal funds custodians so that they could get used to that. We also, in the informal fund training, wanted to make sure that commanders were aware that they had responsibility for that informal fund, as well as whomever they were appointing to that position, so that they could take that seriously and really look at what they were doing. The last piece that we did, and you have it in front of you, is a SMART book. And for us, this was the highlight. We reached out across the Army and we looked for best practices. We looked for templates. We looked for what made sense that we could provide to leaders in our communities to help make it easier to have the SOP done, to do the volunteer management, to look at how communication took place. And it started out as we wanted templates. And it turned into what you have in front of you, which really is an operations manual that provides the ins and outs in a one-stop shop of where an FRG leader, a commander, an FRL, anyone in that leadership team can go to look at and see what that training looks like. So we can go to the next slide. What we wanted to do is, so why? You know, why change it, right? OpReady's there, it's doing something. Well, when we had learned over all these years, figure FRGs really were formalized in 1990 after the first Gulf War. We'd had some things before that, but that's where they really saw that if families had information, they tended to fare better, and soldiers tended to fare better after the deployment if they had been connected to the unit and connected to resources. So Army Family Team Building was created, family support groups were created, and then in 2006, we had OpReady and FRGs placed into AR 608-1, which is the Army Community Service Regulation, as Appendix J. But from 2006 to 2016, we've learned a lot in terms of how we take care of families, what our families need, and where it is we're going. And so we wanted to create something that really kept the adult learner in mind, that was an interactive training. It wasn't somebody sitting up at the screen kind of flipping things like we're doing now, right? We're going to do an activity in a little bit so you guys get a feel for what that interaction looks like. But we really wanted to provide you all with something that truly made sense in 2016, 2017 for where the Army was going for the next 5 or 10 years when it comes to how we support our families. We wanted this to be developed by the field. This was not something we wanted to do in a vacuum. It wasn't something that we wanted to contract out to a university. It was something that we wanted to get down to the field and ask commanders, FRG leaders, family readiness advisors, family readiness liaisons, key contacts, soldiers, family members, all those different people. What do you need? What do you want? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? And so we took all that information, and that's what you see when you go to this training. It truly was something that was developed for the field, by the field, with the field in mind. We wanted it to really focus on mission essential activities. One of the things as we went out is we found that there were so many different ways that FRGs were operating, and some of them were so far off from what the initial mission of the FRG was, and some of our FRG leaders were overwhelmed. Absolutely overwhelmed with what they were being asked to do. And we needed to roll that back. And our FRGs are about communication. They're about supporting families and providing them with resources. They're not party planners. They're not counselors. They're not all these other things that we know our FRGs have come to be over the last how many years, right? So we wanted to roll that back and peel that onion back and say, what's the core? What's the essence? What do we really need to ask people who are going to step into a volunteer role to do? And we also wanted to make sure the commander understood what that volunteer was being asked to do on behalf of the command. And that was key to how we then proceeded with this training and how we tied it back to how our families are ready, affects how our soldiers are ready, affects how our units are ready. We wanted it to be joint, which I've already discussed. We wanted it to be a core training because we know that there are specific missions that some of our units have that are going to need some finessing with this. We know that informal funds has a lot of information and a lot of policy that's at the local level. So we wanted to be able to have it be somewhat flexible, but have that core still there that's the same no matter where an FRG leader goes. And we wanted it to be something that no matter which component they went to, they would still know exactly what it was, what that mission of FRG was. We can go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit about the timeline. I said this has been a project that's been a passion for the last 2 years. And one of the things that I really like to talk about when I talk this timeline is the surveys, the assessments that we sent out, because that was the start of this project. We had some things that were going on before that. We knew we needed to update it. We looked at some things. We were looking at simply doing a basic update. But when I sent out the pre-assessment surveys to say, hey, what do you need? What I found was we had communities that were doing a 2-hour FRG training, and that was good. And then that FRG leader would move to another community that said, no, that's not good, and you were given the wrong information. You need a 3-day training. And then you move someplace else and you didn't need any training at all. And then you move someplace else and it looked a little different. I had commanders who had all different kinds of ideas of what an FRG was. We had over 450 FRG leaders and over 150 commanders from company to brigade level that did the survey that we'd put out through informal channels to come up with what that looked like. I utilized a Facebook group of FRG leaders, put it out through them, and they all said, let me tell you what I feel. Let me tell you what the training looks like. Let me tell you what that's about. And so we spent a lot of time looking at that. And one of the things that you'll see throughout this timeline is, again, we weren't working in a vacuum. We went to our major commands, to our DRUs, to our ASAs, and asked them and said, what do you need? Can you talk to your senior leaders and find out what it is that they think is necessary? When we did the draft products, we pushed it out through various sites and said, let us know what you think. And boy, we changed the draft based on what they thought. What the original product looks like and what you will see are two very, very different things because we really wanted that feedback. One of the other things that we did, because the assessments told us the training was only as good as the trainer. So one of the things that we did with this training is we left very, very specific notes in that training so that that trainer could understand FRG, that if they go through and they read those notes, they're going to be able to understand FRG forward and backward. We wanted them, as they're presenting, to be people who are subject matter experts. And so part of that was also teaching them how to train the material. So as this was all going through OT JAG review, as we were getting ready to release the pilot in January of this year, one of the things that we did was we took the time to do webinar-based training for over 400 active component Army Community Service personnel and our National Guard family programs so that they understood what interactive training looked like, what it was that we were trying to ask, and they were able to work out those bugs and talk through those things that were challenges for them so that, again, your trainers are all talking the same language in the field no matter where that family is being trained. We will continue to work that training program. It's a piece of what needs to be done because we know that we have turnover, of course, in our positions, and so we'll need to continue to keep up with that, but that is one of the things that we're looking at. Our goal is to try to release the final training in Q1 of this FY. However, we know that there's been some challenges with that as well. We have OT JAG review, holidays are coming up, a lot of things like that, so we're expecting most likely Q2, and I'll talk more about that as we do the way ahead. I think that one of the things that's most important here is to recognize that, again, this was a work of passion, it was a work of time, it was a work of effort, and it was a work that wasn't done in a vacuum. And you'll see that by the next slide. Can you go ahead to the next slide? So here we have what the pilot was. So in 2016, January of 2016, we began our pilot. And by my command had told me, you've vetted this, you've done this, what I would like for you to do is I'd like you to put it out as a pilot Army-wide and collect data. The National Guard took it, and they had 4 states that participated in a pilot product, in the pilot. We had over 2,100 responses, and you can see that we had them from all different demographics. So we had brigade commanders on those command teams. We had command sergeant majors. We had our family readiness liaisons that were everywhere from specialists up to a staff sergeant, and in some cases sergeant first class. We had first lieutenants, second lieutenants, captains all looking at it. And then we had our family readiness leaders and advisors. We had senior advisors that were at the brigade level, at the division level that were looking at this, as well as FRG leaders that were on the ground doing this. We had a mix of people who it was their first training and people who this was their 3rd or 4th training that they took because we wanted to get that look across all demographics. And we did all of the different modules that we talked about earlier. Every module was included in this. The most attended was the foundations training. The second most attended was the informal funds custodian training. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is really just some of the participant feedback, and what it told us was we got a lot of things right. I was on a Facebook page the other day, and somebody said, oh, I attended the pilot training. I learned more in the 4 hours I was there than in the 3-day class I attended 6 years ago. Right? We had commanders say, this course needs to be in PCC. It needs to be in the pre-command course. We had commanders say, I had no idea that there were all these different things that I had a responsibility to do. We need to make sure we take this back to our units. Our ACSs saw an increase in the amount of FRG training that they were being requested to do by unit after we provided this training to them. But it really told us there were a lot of things that we got right. But if we look at the next slide, there were some things that we still needed to work on. Right? There were some redundancies. There were some things where it kind of was a little, because we have the joint service effort, there's some things where we have National Guard and we have active component and we have reserve resources. So there were some things like, can we maybe slim this down to make sense for the particular audience that we're looking at? And the Smart Book. So I want to just talk just a little bit about the Smart Book here. One of the things that was a challenge for us, as you see, that's a 300-page document. It's not an inexpensive book to reproduce. So we actually had people who had emotional responses to being asked to return their Smart Books at the end of training and said, no, this is mine. So we knew that there was some good stuff in there. We needed to work on the organization a little bit. So what you have in front of you is version 1.0. Based on all the feedback that we have, we will be doing some reorganization of it, adding a couple pieces, taking some things. There were some places where we actually needed to make sure that we'd taken the names out and some other stuff that we missed the first time through. So we're working those pieces of it, and we're also working to incorporate the other comments that were included into the actual training. So that's what the group has been working on since August. And then we're working to get it to OT-JAG and then out from there. So, but what we see is we see this as a living document, both the training and the Smart Book. It's not proprietary to anybody but the Army. So that means that as things change, we have the capability to make those changes as well. The other thing that we've done is we told, this is something, especially with the Smart Book, if commanders want to publish it, they have access to it through the VFRG website in the download section. They can go there, they can pull the PDF file, and they can use their appropriated funds to provide that for their FRG leaders. At the local level, installations based on budget will have that capability to print it if they so desire, to burn it to disk. But everybody has access to it in editable formats through the armyfrg.org website. Because in there what we did is we loaded it as a PDF and we loaded it as all the Word files so that people can get into there, pull what they need off, make changes so that it's very simple to update an SOP. It's very simple to update a spreadsheet for informal funds or whatever it is. It's a usable tool for our volunteers and for our commanders. Next slide, please. So what I want to do with you now is when I originally was asked to come speak, I was asked to come and provide the foundations training for you, but it's an 1.5 hour long training, and I don't think there's a lot of things going on at AUSA besides foundation training, and you can get that training at your installations or through your family programs offices as needed. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you just a little bit of a sneak peek of what this looks like. Recognize that there may be some changes to the look of the slides, but the content is going to remain based on some of the feedback and what the team is working on now. So let's go to the first slide in the training examples. This slide is in every single module. And what we really want to do, again, is get across that it takes both soldier readiness and family readiness to get at unit readiness. If families are not ready, if families do not have access to the resources they need, they cannot be, where our soldiers are being pulled from duty in order to support, or what studies have shown is that soldiers who have a network, who have a social network of support around them, do better during deployment, post-deployment, during training, and throughout their military career, because that family knows how to support them. When my brother was diagnosed with PTSD, he had a family around him who understood what those resources were, knew where to go to get them, and were able to get them the support that he needed. We need that for every soldier, and we need that for every family in our Army. And so if we take away either part of this equation, that soldier isn't functioning in a way that that soldier can support that unit. And so we really feel that family readiness and family readiness groups is a part of this equation. Many of our trainers out in the field will introduce this as the new Army math problem. And they really feel strongly about this. So you'll see this throughout the training. And everything that we wrote and everything that we did in this training was based specifically on this equation. And with this in mind, as we looked at how we trained our family readiness groups. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So in Foundations, what we really did is we wanted to focus very specifically on what is family readiness, right? Because it's more than FRG. Family readiness is a lot of different pieces. And so we went to the DoD, to the Department of Defense Instruction, said, what does the Department of Defense define as family readiness? And then what does the Army define as family readiness? And what we found was that there were really 3 pieces that were important that we needed to really base that equation on. Families need to be knowledgeable, families need to be aware of the resources, and they need to be able to make use of those resources. Do you think FRGs can be leveraged to do that? Absolutely. If our families are connected, if they have communication coming down from the command, if they're aware of what the mission is, if they're aware of what it is that their soldiers are being asked to do, if they have access to resources, if an FRG, if they call up somebody, that human connection, and say, here's what I've got going on, and that human connection can say, here's a resource that can help you with that, and somebody can help that new family get to that resource, we develop an army of self-sufficient families that are resilient and that are able to support we're going to be able to take whatever comes their way based on our current operational environment that our military has. So we really looked at these 3 things as being, that's the mission of the FRG. So how do we help FRG leaders and commanders get there? Next slide. This is in the command team training, and I put it in here because it really does tell you the bottom line up front. As I went and I talked to commanders, one of the things that they all told me as I did the training, because I had some stuff like, this is what the FRG end state's going to be. Commander said, don't tell me at the end. Tell me at the beginning. Why do I need to be here? Why do I need to listen to you? And why is this important to me? So we said, we'll put it at the very beginning so that commanders understand this is what the FRG is going to be, and this is what it's going to do for them. So they get that equation, and they get this bottom line up front from the very beginning. And it tells them that their FRGs really have to do with a network of communication in order to help mitigate potential risks. And that's what family readiness groups do in order to support family readiness. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me. And there you see our equation again, right? Okay. So what are FRG activities, right? So here I'm talking to you all about, we wanted to make sure that they focused on readiness, that they really looked at the family readiness piece. And so we started to really boil down what's mission essential. And this comes directly out of the AR. Now, one of the things that I will tell you is that as I went through and we did all of this, people had a lot of policy suggestions. We don't work policy. My counterparts at AXIM work policy, so I shared with them those things. So as we developed this training, we had to work with what currently exists and best practices, because that's what we really have the capability to train on, and we don't want to step outside of what the AR says. So we looked in there, and this is what the AR says our FRG should be doing. Member meetings, committee meetings, so those are like your steering committees, distribution of readiness information, education. Notice they all have to do with communication, right? And really informing families. So again, that's where we set it. But we also knew, if you can go to the mission, non-mission essential, there are a couple of things that we do in FRGs that help build esprit de corps. And that is the social events, and there is some fundraising to support those social events. But we wanted to minimize that piece, but also being aware that there is a need, because we don't want our volunteers to be paying out of pocket, which is why it was allowed for fundraising to begin with was to support FRG leaders and commanders who were paying out of pocket for pizza at the FRG meetings, paying for the small get-together and the food that went with that, or for for something very simple to go along with that. Not to have Christmas parties for the unit, not to have huge organizational day events. It really was to focus down on that. So we took it back and said that's really where we want it to be. So there is some in there, but it's really looking at it from the perspective of how do you build esprit de corps and how do you help new families build social networks? Because if they're not coming to the meetings, but they're enticed to come to a social event, we want that. But we also want our commands and our FRG leaders to recognize there's a lot of things that are going on out in our communities that are at no cost that they can leverage and pull into the FRG and to utilize that as well. Okay, if we go to the next slide. As I said earlier, the FRG is not alone in its mission of family readiness. It's an entire system that exists. And so, again, throughout our command team training, our FRG leader, and our FRL training, we really want them to focus on what else is out there. So you're the FRG, you're one piece, but what else exists? What of your MWR activities? What of your quality of life? Where's your ACS, your boss? DEERS is a part of that. Your AFES facilities are a part of that. All these different things exist in order to help with soldier and family readiness. And so we talk to commanders, FRG leaders, and FRLs about how they're one piece of that, and they don't have to be the end-all, be-all for our families. Right? Let's leverage what exists out in our communities, whether it's our local communities, our installations, in order to provide the best for our families, because the Army and the local communities surrounding our Army have a lot to offer that our FRGs can leverage, rather than expecting our FRGs to duplicate efforts that are already out there. So we talk to our families, our volunteers about that. And then our next slide. This is one that I originally didn't have in here, but I thought it was important to include because in every single one of our pilot programs, this slide got a yes, yes, and yes. Because so often, readiness, family readiness, has been pushed to our FRG volunteers saying, you know, this family needs, or this is going on, take care of this, do this, and our demands on our volunteers have risen. But if you listened to General Milley last year in this room, he was asked a question about blended retirement. And somebody said, who's going to let the spouse know about the new blended retirement program? And who remembers what he said? He said the soldier. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean, well, it means that the soldier is aware. The soldier will provide information to the command so that the family can be reached out to in order to do that. The soldier can take the information and do that. It doesn't mean that the FRG still isn't going to outreach. But one of the things is we talk to FRG leaders over and over again, one of their biggest challenges was soldiers were not giving them family information. How many, I mean, and just kind of redundant question, think to yourself, those of you who've been in that role, how much you've pulled your hair out trying to keep a roster updated, because soldiers don't want to provide the information, or they provide fake information, or those things. So this is really to talk to the commanders about your soldiers need to be transparent. They do have a responsibility, and part of that responsibility is ensuring that their families have access to readiness services that exist. And those readiness services, one of them is their FRG, right? So we need to make sure that our soldiers know what an FRG is, know how it is that it can be leveraged to help them, and how it's going to support their families and connect their families. Okay? So that's a command talk with soldiers. That's a sergeant major talk or a first sergeant talk with soldiers about how they bear that responsibility and what that looks like. Let's go to the next slide. So wire diagrams were kind of controversial as we did this, because we said if you put that out there, everybody's going to think that's how an FRG has to be. Well, one of the things that we really encourage our trainers to do is to talk to their senior commanders on their installations to say, what is your family readiness plan? What does it look like? What is your mission, and how is it supported? Our WTBs, for example, have taken FRG and moved it from the company level to a battalion level because it makes sense for them, based on the mission that they have and what they've got going on. In some instances, this particular structure doesn't even work because that unit doesn't fall under this structure when we look at special forces and some of our other units that exist. But what we did is we put 3 different wire diagrams in that focus on the 3 different components and how the overall structure looks, and then we told trainers, work with your senior command. If this doesn't work, talk to them a little bit about it. But what you'll see here is we tried to really draw a line between where family readiness sits and where FRG sits. Family readiness is the brigade, the division, the brigade, and the battalion commander's responsibility. What is that plan? What does it look like? What are your orders, your operational orders to your company commanders when it comes to how they're going to support family readiness? FRG, most of the time, lies at the company level. Why? Because FRGs are intended to help build a social support network. And when you put it at a higher level, it's too many people. They don't know who to go to. It's overwhelming. The missions might be different. I worked with an aviation unit that had different rotations of deployment for each of their companies. And not only that, they were task force organized and were all over the place. It wouldn't have worked to have had them at a battalion level, but to have them at a company level, they were able to truly get out the right information to those families and connect those families to their units and to the resources in the community based on the mission at hand. So that's really what we wanted to do here, was just kind of talk about that and also look at what are some of those family readiness issues. If you're a commander, what are some of those other family readiness pieces? So you'll see care team, you'll see the brigade steering committee meeting, you'll see FRG social media. Right? Those are things that at a battalion level you can take care of that are part of readiness that don't need to be pushed down to the company, that can provide that overarching fundamental, kind of that foundation, if you will, for how family readiness is going to operate at the lowest level. And then in the foundations training, we'll go through each of those different positions, including the family readiness advisor at the battalion or brigade level, the FRL position, how steering committee meetings work, all of which were not included in the old training at all. So we wanted to provide, and while senior advisors are not in the current regulation, we really felt that that added value to have mentorship, coaching, and that sort of relationship between our senior advisors and our FRG leaders who were up and coming. I've had people ask, why didn't you develop a senior leader advisor training to go along with this? And that's because the foundations training is intended to provide that brusher up, but then we felt that there were already existing programs out there that senior advisors could take, such as professional and personal development out of Army Family Team Building, which talks about coaching and mentoring, as well as time management and other skills that senior advisors would need or family advisors would need, and the resiliency training offered through Comprehensive Soldier Family Fitness provides a lot of resiliency skills that advisors would need to have in order to be effective in the position that they did. So we want, rather than create new things, we want to capitalize on what's already out there and what's already working, rather than make something new when it's not necessarily needed. We're looking to reduce redundancies, not increase them. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to kind of get into a little bit. So that's all kind of the foundational pieces and the things that we're looking at as we set it up. And then we get into the mission, and we talk to families about how they communicate. So here's where I want to do a short activity with you all real quick. You all have index cards that were placed on your tables. What I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to just take a minute, and I want you to write down how you prefer to be communicated to in a professional environment. Think about it for a minute. Write it down on your card. If you're in a professional environment, what is your preferred method of communication? Now, take a minute and just very quickly, to the right and the left of you, share what you wrote down. Okay. Okay. Very quickly. Okay. All right. So here's my question. Did you all have the same? Right? Did you all have the same way? I'm hearing a lot of discussion. So that indicates to me you didn't all have the same way. How many of you, let's see a raise of hands. How many of you chose face-to-face? Face-to-face communication. How many of you chose an email? How many of you chose social media? Nobody. How many of you chose a meeting? No, I'm being told no meetings, right? So interestingly enough, as we look at that, there are generational preferences that go with how we communicate. Would your answer have been different if I'd asked you to tell me how you like to communicate socially? Probably, right? Interestingly enough, how many people think that a Gen Zer or a millennial would have said that they want face-to-face professional communication? My daughter's a Gen Zer, she said face-to-face. My son is a millennial, he said face-to-face in a professional setting. When I asked them socially, my daughter said texting and my son said by phone. Okay, so there's different ways. One of the things to keep in mind, and I don't want to get too far into the training on this, but very interestingly, as we look at communication styles, most of us that are taking on leadership roles right now tend to be in the Gen X or identify as Gen X. And we know that people will cross generational boundaries. Different people will identify different ways with different generations based on how they're raised, their family makeup, and that. But there are some basic stereotypes, as you will, of the generations. And so a lot of us are Gen Xers as we're moving into leadership roles. And if you look at Gen Xers, we hate meetings. There is no reason to have a meeting whatsoever because you can send it to me in an email. You can tell me over the phone. I can get it via text. I don't need a meeting. But did you know that your millennials like to go to meetings? They want to read ahead that says, here's the basic information, and then they want to come to a meeting to discuss it and share ideas. Your baby boomers, if they go to a meeting, they just want you to tell you what it is and get out the door. So do you see how that communication, based on who you have in your group, needs to be different? And based on not only that, but demographics. So at your table, you have different demographics. And I don't know if we'll get to the activity, but I want you to think about that demographic that you have on your table, because they're all a part of the FRG, but they all have different needs, they all have different ways they want to be communicated, and they all need different resources. And we need to keep that in mind. And so as we go through the training, these are the things that we discuss. Let's go to the next slide. We also did want to make sure that we address the social media platforms that exist because it is one of the main topics of communication as I look on FRG information boards. What can I do? What can't I do? Again, remember the FRG is the Commander's Program. And so we talked to FRG leaders about rather than developing a separate FRG Facebook platform, utilize the Facebook platform that currently exists by the unit. Because if the FRG's main purpose is to put out information, that unit Facebook page should be meeting a majority of that need. There may be some additional pieces that you want to include, and some people like to have the Facebook group for communication and to build kind of those social networks. So you need to look at that. And also recognize that there are Army-specific platforms, such as eArmy messaging and Army FRG, which is currently undergoing a translation that can assist with that as well. We did not put in a full-blown training on this because PAO through SlideShare has a wonderful training that already exists, and they have a social media handbook that is constantly being updated. We would not be able to keep our training up to date with what OCPA is putting out in terms of guidance because it's changing regularly based on mission, based on what's out there, based on what's going on. So we encourage our trainers in the field to work with their public affairs offices to put together at the installation level some sort of FRG forum that provides that additional training for FRG leaders that are interested in learning how to leverage social media to build that community in that virtual world. And then for the Reserve and National Guard, they have specific information that they would put out through their channels as well that meets that mission. So we do address it, but we address it briefly and then encourage additional training on that so that people are getting the right information from the subject matter experts at hand. So let's look at the next slide. FRG volunteers are the core at what FRG is, right? It's about those people who step up and say, I'm willing to do this. And when FRGs first started, it was very much an FRG leader was the commander's spouse and the first sergeant's spouse, and that was it. But that's not how we are today. Because again, we're a changing army, right? And our families have changed as well. And so we have all kinds of people who are taking on the role of volunteer. We have soldiers, we have parents, we have siblings, we have aunts, we have fiancés, we have all these different people who have stepped up into the role of volunteer because they have a passion for families and they have a passion for taking care of families. And so what we wanted to do here is we wanted to talk to each of those different groups, the command team, the FRL, and the FRG leader, about selecting how do you recruit volunteers? Commanders, how do you select volunteers? Because it's your role as a commander to select that volunteer, not the FRG leaders. They may recruit, they may give advice, but ultimately that volunteer is volunteering on behalf of the command, and the commander needs to be aware of that. How do they retain those volunteers? How do they delegate responsibility out? If you're an FRG leader, how do you leverage those volunteers? What does that look like, and what does that mean to you? Sometimes it's hard to figure out how to work with volunteers. It's hard to recruit volunteers these days, right? I know a lot of FRG leaders who are doing 3 or 4 roles when it comes to this kind of work. But what we want to do is give you the tools. And so in the SMART book, for each of those different groups, there's actually a whole section on volunteer management. Everything from how to be an operational point of contact in VMIS, or how to use the Joint Services, the JSS system for the National Guard. And again, VMIS is also being translated, so it's going to be a much more user-friendly, yeah, right? So it's going to be much more user-friendly, but what we've done is we've put that information into that book for you so that you've got ideas on what you can do. How do you recruit? And then, commanders, how do you recognize? Because again, a lot of times our FRG leaders are the ones that are putting those together, but we want our commanders to really take on that responsibility. So we've provided them with all of the formal recognition, how that's done, as well as informal recognition techniques. So all those tools are in that book for them to use. And everybody leaves this section with a plan, right? How are you going to leverage your volunteers? And for commanders, what is your volunteer plan? How are you going to recruit, select, retain, and recognize your volunteers? And take that plan and use it. Right? So let's go to the next slide. So here we talk about funding streams. So much fun. Okay? This is probably the part that I think pulls people's hair out the most and has some of the biggest challenges associated with it is what are those funding streams? There is an MDEP for FRG. It does exist. There is appropriated funds that are available, but it has to be included in a unit budget. So we want to talk to commanders about that, and that they need to be aware and they need to be talking with their battalion and brigade commanders about where it is in the budget and how they can leverage appropriated funds. And we want to talk about informal funds. And like I said, informal funds was the biggest training. So every training has this in it, but this is where we start our informal funds training, so that our informal funds custodians understand what those different funding streams are, so that if they're being asked to use informal funds to buy mission essential items, such as, say, pre-deployment packet information, they're not doing that. They're saying, that's not what the informal fund is for. There should be appropriated funds money set aside for that. We need to look into that. Because the informal fund custodian, they're the custodian of that account. They are ultimately responsible for that money. And so they need to be able to recognize where the funding streams are, how it's used, and what goes on. And then the FRG training for informal fund custodian goes into all of those different in-depth into informal fund. How do you set up a new bank account if you don't have one? The information is in that SMART book so that somebody can contact the IRS. Now, social security numbers have to be tied to an EIN. So if you are setting up a new EIN and you have to have a social security number, whose social security number should be associated with that? How do you change that social security number when you leave because you don't want your information tied to that account anymore, right? So there's all these different nuances, and those are included in there. The other thing that's included in the informal funds custodian training is very specific local guidance, because what I found as I moved to headquarters was that there are a lot of things when it comes to fundraising and it comes to how informal funds are actually executed are local policy decisions. So we want our trainers to go talk to our JAGs and to our MWR staff on the installations at our family programs, talking to their JAGs and talking to their family programs offices and to those higher up about what are the policies when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to spending money, when it comes to reporting, how are the annual reports done, how are the monthly reports done, are ledgers required. A lot of that stuff is at a local level. It's not included in the regulatory guidance. And so that's where this training becomes a little bit more locally specific because of some of those nuances that go with raising funds. Let's look at the next slide. So again, one of the things that we really wanted to do as we did this training is we wanted to make sure that it was really set up for all of our different commands. And so everybody who goes through this training as a volunteer or as a command team, an FRL, whomever they may be, will leave with some kind of plan. But we very deliberately spent about an hour of the command training is spent on this slide and on that smart book. Because what we're doing with them is we're saying, what is your plan? How are you going to move forward? You've taken this training. What does that mean to you? And how do you want to move it forward? So we want them to leave with a course of action for their family readiness program, whether they attend the training as a battalion commander or brigade commander, whether they attend it as an FRL or an FRG leader. We want them to have a plan. Okay, next slide. So this is where I was going to do an activity with you, but my timer is telling me I have just a little bit of time left, so we're going to skip the activity so that I can get you guys to the information, all right? But again, you have table tents there, and what I want you to remember with your table tents is that you have all these different demographics that can use your FRG and should have access to it. So take time on the break to look at all those different groups and consider how it is that you outreach to them. How do you make them feel as though they're a part of that team, and how do you make sure that they have the connections they need to be family ready? Let's look at the next slide. Go ahead to the next slide. So the way ahead. We're in the process of finalizing the final product with OT-JAG. We have a goal of having this out by Q2 of this fiscal year, but we need to make sure we want to get you the product right. Okay, so I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So please be aware that that may be a little sooner, maybe a little later, depending on how that team works. They also are the same team that are responding to all of the family assistance cases for the hurricanes and for the wildfires and everything else that's going on. So they have a lot on their plate as they're working all these different pieces. And then what we want to do, so that's kind of component specific as we do the initial publication. And then we will codify it into regulatory guidance, which will then require an Army-wide implementation of the program. Okay? And then we want to look at where are those key places. So Fort Benning, for example, does a really great spouse education program, and they've taken some of this training and they're using it, and those spouses that are attending ALC and some of their different programs are then going out because they have that education behind them, and they're able, as they go to their next duty station and they take on leadership roles, they're doing that. So we're looking at where does it make sense in the Army for both our soldiers and our family members to have this training so that as they exit that duty station or that particular part of their life, they go and they export good things across the Army. And finally, I'm really excited to announce that I've been working with TRADOC for the last 2 years, and all of this training, the TRADOC awarded what would you call it, a funding to me to translate all this into computer-based training. So all of the real training will be computer-based. It will be housed in ALMS for soldiers so that it will translate onto their ATARs, and it will be housed on on a portal, a public-facing portal for family members because they don't have a CAT card to get into ALMS. So people will be able to access it however they need, and they'll get a certificate that they can then print out, take to their commander, and meet that for our geographically separated or for people who just can't get into the classroom. What we are encouraging is that they do take the time to get into their ACS, their family programs, wherever it might be, to get those local resources and that local guidance, because we can't put that into computer-based training. Army Family Team Building is also being translated and will be included as a part of that as well. Right, so everybody wants to know where they can go to get it, right? Next slide. Go to your local ACS or to your family programs offices. Work with if you're at an MCOM installation and you're at a major command level in ASU or DRU, work through your installation management directorates We all have functionals there. You can talk with them about how it's being put out. We will put information out that way. We will use social media and various ways to make sure that you all are getting the information as this goes into final production and we have it out. Like I said, the digital smart book is available currently on armyfrg.org, and that's where we'll continue to update it. I have some people that I need to thank very quickly as we wrap up, and I know I took more time, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to questions right now, but I will be downstairs after Family Forum 3 down at the Installation Management Community booth in the exhibition hall, so I can talk to you all then, and of course I'll be here throughout the day as well to be able to answer questions. So if we can go to the next slide. The first group I need to thank are if we can go to the next slide, please. You're going backwards. There we go. Nope, go forward, go backwards one slide. There you go. This was the original team that wrote this training, and like you said earlier, you had a mix of Guard, Reserve, and active component. There was over 300 years of family programs experience, and there was more passion in that room than you could possibly imagine. And then I also need to thank, so if you can go to the next slide. These were the initial units that the draft training was sent out to. We had 4 commands, 4 National Guard states, 7 installations, and 24 units at varying levels and varying methods to support the initial feedback of the draft materials. It is because of these commands and the dedication that these families and these commanders had in providing us this that we have it. I have a special thank you for Lieutenant General and Mrs. Vandal of 8th Army, Lieutenant General and Mrs. McFarland of 3rd Corps, Major General and Mrs. Flynn of 25th ID, Brigade General and Mrs. Droschel of U.S. Forces Korea J4, Colonel Retired and Mrs. Brush, Secretary to the U.S. Republic of Korea SOFA Joint Committee, U.S. Forces Korea, and Colonel and Mrs. Donahue at the Center of Excellence in Maneuver for unprecedented access to their soldiers, to their volunteers, and to their passion to make sure that we had something that met the needs across the Army and represented every single person, not only in this room, but who is at any duty station and any component across the Army. So thank you for your time and attention today.
A quick question about the process. It still needs to go through legal, doesn't it? And
Yes,
then
ma'am.
still needs to be proofed by the senior leaders before it becomes.
So yes, so it will go through AXIM. AXIM will look at it from a policy and senior leader perspective, and that's the Assistant Secretary of Installation. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong.
Installation management.
Installation management that will look at it from that perspective, and then OT-JAG at the Army level will also review it. The pilot was reviewed by both those teams, but because we made changes, we need to take it back through them to make sure that's okay.
And then it goes through senior leadership for proofing as well. Senior.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. So Patty, it's you.
So Heather, thank you so much. If there's the kind of passion that you showed in briefing us as in the book, we really are in for quite a treat. There's an awful lot of work that went into that, and I know you still have a few more steps to go, but I think that everyone's going to be looking forward to 2018 and getting that their hands on the final product. Thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break, allow everybody kind of have a chance to talk a little bit about what they just heard, because I know I've got lots of questions, and we will regroup here in 5 minutes. Would everyone get to their seats, please? Thank you. It's time to get back to your seats. Thank you. We'll be introducing our next speaker, and you'll need to get back to your seats, please. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really great. So Heather, again, thank you very much, and I put a little packet on your chair there. I appreciate it. So now it is my honor to introduce to you Ms. Diane Randon. Ms. Randon was inducted into the Senior Executive Service in June 2007. She has served in her current role as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Installation Management since October 2012. Since July 2017, she is temporarily assigned, performing the duties of Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Manpower and Reserve Affairs. In this temporary position, Ms. Randon supports the principal, who is responsible for the supervision of manpower, personnel, and reserve component affairs for the Department of the Army. She serves as the Army's point for policy and performance oversight of human resources, military, civilian, and contractor, training, readiness, mobilization, military health affairs, force structure, manpower management, equal opportunity, equal employment opportunity, and other critical matters as part of the Army leadership. She's a very busy woman. Ms. Diane Randon.
Well, good morning. Yes, we're still in morning. It's great to see all of you. It's a pleasure to be here today and have this time to talk with all of you. Patty, thank you for such a warm welcome in this invitation. And as always, the Association of the United States Army has done a tremendous job putting together this year's meeting and exposition and these family forums. I was here for the family forum yesterday. Wow. I don't know if any of you also joined me. Our Surgeon General's remarks on wellness were compelling, as well as that Canadian commercial on how we live our life. I reinforce the invitation from yesterday for our soldiers, families, and civilians to explore and use those increasing number of wellness centers across our installations. I want to start by framing today's theme, identifying needs and leveling expectations. Today's Army is comprised of about 1 million soldiers across all components and roughly 1.3 million family members. And the strength of our Army hinges on their collective readiness. Soldiers and families tend to be self-sufficient, but as Dr. Sams from RAND will discuss later, unmet needs can translate into a wider range of challenges for families because problems in one area of life often spill into others. Consequently, understanding those needs and investing in the right programs and services at the right levels is our priority and our goal. I'm going to fill you in on some things that the Army is doing to take care of soldiers and families and anticipate needs, balance resources, and leverage partnerships that I'm looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. Let me start by telling you a little bit about myself so you get an idea of my perspective. I've been a Department of Army civilian for 28 of my 32 years of civil service. The other 4 years were inside OSD, but not with Army. I am proud of my service to our Army. Most of my professional career has been as a comptroller, and for the last 8 years, I have had the privilege of shepherding and advocating for the resources invested in soldier and family readiness. I did not wander into service associated with the military by happenstance. It's been more of a vocation or calling for me. I grew up in a military family. Both of my parents served. My brother was a career Army soldier, and I was married to an Army soldier for 10 years. So I understand the challenges faced by military families from many different sides of the conversation. I will tell you that the old French saying that the more things change, the more they stay the same is certainly true in my experience. My father passed away just 2 years ago. My dad was a bit of a pack rat, but an organized one, and meticulously saved even the most minor records of our family's life: letters, receipts, programs, expired ID cards. Lots of little pieces of paper that capture moments in time. I was probably most appreciative of my mother's saved wedding dress, her uniform as a Navy sailor, along with the reel-to-reel tapes and 35mm slides, including the appropriate devices for viewing, and they worked. So as I worked my way through the stacks of papers and memories earlier this year, I began to remember what it was like to feel like a child of a service member. I remembered the apprehension of the first day at a new school. I remembered waiting for my dad to find us a place to live. I remembered him being gone and feeling anxiety, not knowing when he was going to come back. I also saw, really for the first time, my parents' point of view and what they had to do for our family. I recalled as a military spouse how I would leave a perfectly good job in search of another one at a new destination, and how I would volunteer for the unit family support group, supporting each other in times of need and stress. As I went through this little journey down memory lane, I realized two things. The first, military families still deal with the same challenges my family did. Where will we live? Where will the kids go to school? Can we get the services we need? Will we have to be separated? Will the spouse of the military member be able to find a job? And second, family programs and services have come a long way. When my dad served, the military didn't talk much about family services. You've heard the adage, if the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines wanted you to have a family, they would have given you one. Families mostly just figure it out on their own, often as a distractor for the military member, sometimes taking time and attention away from their mission. Today, we realize that the well-being of Army families is integral to our ability to recruit and retain the all-volunteer force and to maintain the readiness of that force. We also realize it's just the right thing to do, to take care of our most valuable assets, our people. As our chief says, our number one priority is readiness, and there is no other number one. I also heard from the Secretary of Defense at yesterday's opening session that everything that we do must contribute to readiness and lethality. We strongly believe that investing in family programs is a direct contribution to readiness. We know that soldiers cannot fully focus on their duties unless they know that families are taken care of. So soldier readiness plus family readiness equals mission readiness. Before we go further, I do want to give you a little historical perspective on this portfolio. In 2007, the Army Chief of Staff called the Army out of balance and created a series of Army-wide initiatives to bring the Army back into balance. One of those initiatives was the Army Family Covenant. At that time, the Army nearly doubled the investment in soldier and family programs. Before the Army Family Covenant, this portfolio was funded at about 65% of its recognized requirement. Another way to look at it, soldier and family readiness programs were underfunded, and it had been that way for a long time. One major focus of the covenant was to standardize programs across the Army and strategically convey that message of commitment. Fast forward to March 2013, we were confronted with significant reductions from the Budget Control Act, and we're bracing for the impacts of sequestration. Soldier and family readiness programs were impacted, so Army senior leaders inked Total Army Strong to replace the covenant as their commitment to soldiers and families. This provided a platform to balance and reshape soldier and family programs in a constrained resource environment. Total Army Strong shifted the focus of soldier and family programs to readiness and meeting the most critical needs of soldiers and families. Total Army Strong also provided commanders some flexibility to adjust and prioritize programs based on the needs of their soldiers and families. While the Budget Control Act was a bit of a forcing function, the Army Family Covenant had served effectively, but it did need an update. However, this was not the first time we assessed the investment of resources against the portfolio of programs. We have a team dedicated to managing this portfolio, many of who are in this room, and they continuously evaluate the efficacy of our programs and commensurate investment levels. So while we have protected the goodness of family programs, I don't want anyone leaving here today believing we have not sought out to continuously balance, collaborate, and hone, and especially calibrate with precision on how we invest every taxpayer and NAF profit dollar. We continue to evolve programs to meet intended capability. So sometimes that means investing, and sometimes that means decreasing the investment. For example, we have resized programs and reduced investments as we've decreased deployments and downsized our Army. Equally, we have increased some areas like financial readiness training, especially with the implementation of the blended retirement system. Today, we continue the Total Army Strong commitment. We continue to give commanders the flexibility to adjust programs based on the needs of their location populations and ensure they meet readiness levels. So how do we define family readiness? Officially, the Department of Defense defines family readiness as a state of being prepared to effectively navigate the challenges of daily living experienced in the unique context of military service. More specifically, prepared families understand the challenges they may face, such as relocation and deployments. They have the skills needed to function in the face of these challenges. They are aware of available supportive resources, such as Army Community Service, family readiness groups, and MWR activities, and use their skills and resources to manage the unique challenges of military life. As such, we remain committed to a system of programs and services that build readiness, foster life skills, and mitigate the challenges of military life. These programs are valuable investments in our families and the readiness of the force. Readiness cannot be produced overnight. It requires predictable funding over time and steady effort of leaders and professionals. If the Budget Control Act funding levels return, the Army will face increasingly difficult fiscal decisions. We must leverage informed decision-making and evidence of effectiveness to validate that programs contribute to Army readiness. We continue to conduct internal and external program evaluations to ensure the most effective and efficient delivery of service. We also use processes like the Army Family Action Plan, or AFAP, as a readiness multiplier to communicate quality of life issues facing soldiers, civilians, families, survivors, wounded warriors, and retirees. In July, 12 new AFAP issues chosen by constituents from 19 commands entered the issue resolution process. Some of these issues include creating a soldier voluntary leave transfer program, enhancing the post-9/11 GI Bill, and authorizing soldiers alternative medical TRICARE coverage to include chiropractic care. The Army will continue to work these issues over the next several months. While working these issues, we must also continue to evaluate soldier and family readiness to ensure they meet the needs of our soldiers and families. We have 3 critical program groups to serve those needs. The first is the Army Community Service Centers, and they provide a broad array of life skills, education, prevention, and intervention services to strengthen self-reliance and personal readiness. Morale, Welfare, and Recreation Programs, MWR, improve readiness by increasing physical, social, and mental well-being. Single soldiers are often away from home, friends, and family for the first time in their lives. This is what makes MWR programs very important. Child Youth School Services support readiness by reducing lost duty time due to conflict between parental responsibilities and mission requirements. Last year, there were more than 245,000 children and youth enrolled in our programs. Child development and care in a safe, healthy environment is a key factor in soldier and family readiness. While we are convinced of the value of our family programs, our constrained budgetary environment means we must do our best to shape our investments to meet our families' needs when our strategic environment continues to change. For example, just a few years ago, we developed a plan to downsize the Army. Now we are planning to support an increased end strength. The size of our military and its family population is a major driver in determining our investment levels. How do we fund warfighting capabilities and deter threat in an international situation, and according to the Secretary of Defense's words yesterday, is more complex and demanding than he's ever seen, while also funding all the programs and services that enable readiness? It is truly a balancing act that requires give and take on all sides. We already know that soldiers and families are resilient and self-sufficient and will figure it out. And we are committed to ensuring that we help through the delivery of these programs. We are increasingly using partnerships to leverage organizational resources, expertise, and experience to deliver services in creative and cost-effective ways. Partnerships serve to maximize every dollar and help us deliver high-quality products and services in the most efficient manner possible. We already have very strong community partnerships, and we continue to learn from communities where our geographically dispersed Reserve and National Guard members live and work, and the support the communities provide to them. Here are a couple of examples of what we consider success stories. The Army's Residential Communities Initiative, or RCI, is a perfect example of a public-private partnership. Through RCI, the Army transferred 85,000 previously owned homes to private developers. The private partners renovate, build, and maintain quality homes in return for Basic Housing Allowance, or BAH. When we started this program in 1998, the average age of our housing inventory was 48 years. That statistic is now down to 12 years, thanks to this innovative partnership. These new homes are often Energy Star compliant, including wireless internet capability and larger bedrooms and closets. All these features contribute to improved quality of life for soldiers and their families. Another example, Fort Sill and the City of Lawton have partnered to help transitioning soldiers as they prepare to leave the Army. The Lawton Workforce Center embedded counselors at Fort Sill to offer a full range of transition services, including employment assistance. A result of this program is that unemployment compensation for soldiers transitioning at Fort Sill has reduced from 20% in 2014 to about 12% now. And there are many other examples of programs and partnerships supporting our transitioning soldiers at every installation. A third example, through partnerships with organizations such as Boys and Girls Clubs of America, Kids Included Together, Child Care Aware of America, 4-H, and countless other organizations, our child and youth programs are able to deliver quality education programs and develop a new generation of leaders who are prepared to live and lead in a global environment. It's clear that community partnerships can create efficiencies and increase cost savings while also providing essential soldier and family services. I believe we have only just started to see what we can achieve when non-federal entities, cities, states, and the Army all work together. Regardless of the challenges the Army faces, through shifting budgets and strategic priorities, I will continue to be a champion for our soldiers and families. We cannot lose sight of the imperative to keep faith with our soldiers and their families. This is key to our readiness and our success in defending our nation now and for generations to come. You see, now that today's Army's kids, we know that today's Army's kids often grow up to be tomorrow's soldiers. In fact, nearly 80% of today's soldiers come from military families. This tells me that individuals considering joining the Army think the Army is a good place to raise a family based on their own experiences. And based on my experience as a military member, spouse, and civilian, I have to agree. I want to close by thanking all of you for your commitment to our Army and our nation. For those of you in this audience and viewing at distant sites who have served, been a family member in support, been a volunteer, a DA civilian providing the service delivery, a public servant, a private partner, and friend to our community, thank you for your service and contributions. Am I to take questions? Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, I will take that as a no. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Randon, thank you so very much. Your comments were very, very appreciated by the audience and especially by me. Thank you. So we're going to go on, and I'm going to bring up our next speaker. But before I do, I wanted to point out that there is a table in the back that has a lot of different handouts. If you haven't had a chance to go by the table to check them out, please do. And you'll see a really nice little banner there that has a soldier's back to you, and there's vet ticks written across his back. That's a wonderful organization that many of you should check out, because they provide free tickets to many, many events all across the country, and veterans and currently serving soldiers and families are entitled to receive them. So right now, I'm going to bring up our next speaker, and hold on a second there. It is Dr. Kara Sims. And Dr. Sims is a senior behavioral and social scientist at the RAND Corporation, working primarily in Project Air Force and Arroyo Center on the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Army Manpower and Wellness. Her current and past research includes investigating the effects of workplace stressors, including military deployment, discrimination, and sexual harassment, on-job attitudes and performance, assessing quality of life issues faced by wounded warriors, military families, and caregivers, evaluating employee selection systems. She also has worked on exploring the effects of organizational climate and culture on job attitudes and behaviors, and how best to change organizational climate and culture, and determining the knowledge, skills, and abilities required for success in various military and civilian jobs. She's going to talk to us about the soldier needs survey that they recently did, and we're really excited about listening to the outcome.
Thank you, Patty, for that introduction, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here and talk to you about the study that we did for the Army at RAND Corporation. So if you'll bring up my, no slides? Technical difficulties, okay. Okay. Well, that's going to be interesting, because I'll try to describe for you what I was going to show to you in charts. But first, I want to mention my co-authors. Obviously, this is not a study that I put together myself. Dr. Tom Trail is also in the audience, Emily Chin, Laura Miller, Beth Lockman. Many people within RAND and within the Arroyo Center helped me put this together. So, the Army has a lot of available survey information, but they tend to ask soldiers and families about what services and programs they use and whether or not they like it. You've probably seen some of these surveys, probably taken them yourselves. And it's sort of like, okay, you've used the bowling alley, do you like it, right? Before the survey effort, no service, including the Army, had any perspective on what I like to call the demand signal. So whether or not the bowling alley is actually helping you solve a problem. The way we got at that is we looked at an entirely different framework for surveys. Rather than asking about a program-centric perspective, we took a step back and said, what are you facing, right? Now, some of these problems and challenges that soldiers and families face are very well known, but nobody had asked them in a comprehensive fashion. And when I say comprehensive, I mean that people had the opportunity to choose up to 83 different things that might apply to them. I'll talk a little bit about this as we go through. But we stepped away and said, okay, let's take soldiers and families through the coping process and see how they're addressing their problems. See what their problems are first over the past year, and ask them to prioritize which are the most important for them, which had the most effect on them, and which had the most influence on their lives and their readiness. Then we ask, again at a very general level, what kind of needs they had to address those problems. When I say general level, we didn't say, tell me about how you use the bowling alley. We said, tell me about whether or not you need activities to help you address these problems. Tell me about whether you needed advice from somebody with experience with similar challenges as you're facing now. If they had a lot of needs for their problems, we also ask them to prioritize again, right? Because we're, as Ms. Randon just mentioned, we're in a constrained environment and we have to prioritize. So it's important to prioritize the things that soldiers and families are finding most important to help them address their problems and needs. So they prioritized the types of help they needed, and then and only then did we say, okay, now let's go to resources. Tell me what you used to help you address those problems. Even then, we were still at a fairly general level. We were asking about morale, rec, and leisure resources rather than the bowling alley. Child and youth services, ACS. These things people find is useful and the Army provides to help soldiers and families solve their problems. We asked not only about military resources, we also asked about non-military resources. Because of course, you use everything available as long as you know it's out there, right? So we wanted to get a comprehensive picture of that as well. The idea here was to start a conversation and get insight into how soldiers and families were being resilient, how they were facing problems, what problems they were facing, and how they were addressing them, and to help make sure that the Army was providing resources that addressed the most important problems and needs for soldiers and families. So I had only one methodology slide anyway, so it should be easy to go through. This is the first time a survey like this had been done on any kind of scale. So we did focus it in on CONUS, continental US, and we did focus it in on active duty soldiers. Obviously, this is not the total Army, but even then we had over 7,000 respondents. The sample was weighted to represent the population. So when I'm speaking of junior enlisted said this, et cetera, that's reflecting the population that we surveyed. Bottom line up front, I'll go over these in more detail as we go through. But I did want to provide an overview to start. When asked to prioritize their problems, the top 3 most frequently prioritized problems were military practices and culture, work-life balance, and their own well-being. This is soldiers we ask, so soldiers' well-being for themselves and their families. I'll describe what those included in a little bit. Not all soldiers reported problems in the past year. Actually, 9% said they did not have problems. For those who did, the top types of help needed to address problems included advice from someone with experience in a similar situation, also education. 24% of those who had problems didn't indicate that they had any needs to help address them. So they were doing okay. They had problems, but they're fine. Looking at the types of resources that soldiers actually reached out to, they used a lot. The majority reached out and to many different resources, on average about 7 across their problems and needs. They often reached out to military resources. Of those who reached out, some said that none of the resources they contacted met their needs well or very well. They were dissatisfied with everything they reached out to, and so we considered those soldiers to have their needs unmet. That was about 11% of soldiers. In simple numbers, which without charts is actually much more helpful than it normally is, 9 out of 10 soldiers reported problems in the past year. 7 out of 10 needed some type of help to address those problems. 6 out of 10 reached out to resources, and 1 out of 10 had unmet needs after reaching out. Paging through my agenda slide, So I said I would unpack our problem categories for you, what we call problem areas. We asked soldiers to consider a broad list of potential problems they might encounter. I mentioned 83 earlier. Oh, hey. All right, I'm on slide 7. There we go. Okay, and now you see the one slide with lots and lots of type. But we did this as a way of providing options that people might feel comfortable with, right? So if you think about you're taking a survey and somebody asks you if you have, well, the survey asks you if you have relationship problems. You might not feel comfortable saying, I have relationship problems. But if the survey asks you a little bit more specifically, did you have trouble communicating with your spouse when you came back from deployment? You can say, yeah, that fits my experience. Alternately, for some of the categories that are a little bit more obscure and might not be clear on their face what we mean by them, like military practices and culture, giving these issues helps soldiers understand what we're asking about. So in terms of examples that we provided, military practices and culture includes things like poor sponsorship or guidance, or poor communication with coworkers and supervisors, or having trouble finding out what's available and how to access it. Work-life balance includes finding time for healthy activities, long work hours, or an inconvenient schedule. And soldier well-being includes feeling stressed, overwhelmed, tired, trouble sleeping, things like that. I won't go through all of these because we have the slides now. But I will go to the next slide. So I mentioned we had soldiers prioritize the problem areas. They could prioritize their top 2. So when you're thinking about the past year, that's a long time frame. Obviously, if you're experiencing challenges, you might have more than one. So we gave them their top 2. These are the most frequent, and I have boxed the ones that were most frequently chosen, the top 3: military practices and culture, work-life balance, and soldier well-being. These were shown, the issues that people could choose were shown as they were applicable. So for example, if you didn't have kids, we didn't ask you about challenges you faced with your kids. If you didn't have a spouse, we refrained from asking those questions because surveys are long and your time is short. Again, I'll stress that 9% identified no problems in the past year. We did also have a write-in option in case we missed anything. We did hope we were comprehensive, but that's not always the case. And so we recognized that even after going through all of the options, some people might feel that their experience was not quite captured. Our write-ins generally reflected the problem areas that we had, but some specific themes included healthcare issues that people had and things like toxic leadership, which we didn't quite capture. Next slide. And here's the agenda slide that I'll skip over really quickly. This is just to help signpost where we are in the presentation. After having soldiers prioritize the challenges that they and their families faced in the past year, we asked what types of help they needed to address them. So these were asked in a very general sense, a little bit less general than is presented here for room purposes, but still pretty general. So advice was advice from someone who had been in the same situation before. Activities included activities for fitness, recreation, stress relief, and family bonding. General information included things like what's available and how to access it. Counseling was professional counseling to distinguish it from emotional and social support. You can see in terms of things people said that they needed, a lot of them were endorsed at about the same rate. So advice, activities, general information, counseling, emotional social support, these were all things that a lot of people needed. Some things were more likely to be endorsed by junior enlisted soldiers, including loans, donations, and specific help, and specific information. They tended to have more needs overall, and some of the less common ones. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the chart that when the charts weren't up, I was really worried about presenting. We looked at the intersection of problems and needs, right? So obviously, it's nice to have a list of problems. It's nice to have a list of things people say they needed. But in order to actually direct resources, it's really helpful to know what that combination is. So these are just the top ones. For military practices and culture, you can think about this means issues like lack of proper guidance or sponsorship, or problems communicating with coworkers and supervisors. The types of things people are saying they needed are things like general information about what's available and how to access it, or advice from somebody who's been there, maybe had some trouble with superiors before, and can give them advice on how to deal with that in a productive manner. For work-life issues, people were saying that they needed activities to help them manage that. And for soldier well-being, people were saying they needed things like emotional support. Next slide. Okay, so here's another agenda slide. We'll skip right over that. Next slide. So we asked about resources. I'll give you the list in a moment, but this is a general presentation. Of those who had problems for which they had a need, 85% sought resources. And they sought a lot of them, on average 7 overall. Respondents reported reaching out to 4 military contacts and 2 non-military contacts. And 94% of them reported seeking military resources. One thing we were a little surprised about was things like distance from post that they lived did not predict whether or not the total number of resources they sought or military-only resources. We asked about what they used or tried to use. Most did not stop at 1. It wasn't clear from the survey if it was because they had complex problems and needed a lot of help, or if they were being referred to one to the other until they found what they needed. Next slide. So how did it work? In general, across resources, the average response was that needs were adequately met. We asked this for the resources you used, and here's the complete list from FRGs to religious or spiritual group or leader on the non-military side. Did it meet your needs on a scale from not at all to very well? On this graph, military resources are on the top, and non-military resources are on the bottom. You can see that chaplain or military religious group are the high point in terms of ratings for satisfaction for military resources. We use this rating to determine unmet needs. For all the resources used for a particular problem and a particular need, we considered a resource to have met that need if it was rated well or very well. If not a single one of the resources they reached out to, and remember they reached out to a lot, if not a single one of those met the need to that level, we said they had an unmet need, right? Because as long as you eventually solve the problem, you've solved the problem. Analysis of differences by pay grade group and family status, controlling for urbanicity of the post, how urban it was, and distance from the post, yielded a significant effect of pay grade group, such that junior enlisted soldiers were more likely to say that they had unmet needs. No other differences for pay grade or family status were significant. The problem domains that had the highest percentage of soldiers with unmet needs were healthcare system problems, military practices and culture, and legal problems and financial problems. More than 10% of soldiers who had a top 2 problem within each of these domains did not have their needs met. We also asked about challenges with the resources they accessed. Some of these are pretty well known, especially if you're looking into behavioral health. Long wait times are pretty common, not just in the Army, in all the services and in the VA, in society. Child and Youth Services reported long wait times as well. One of the interesting things that we found was that even people who are using the chain of command, 19% of those said it might hurt their career, and 18% reported that they were maybe a little unwelcoming or unfriendly, so a little hard to approach. 18% reported difficulty in finding information for contacting the family readiness groups. Next slide. Okay. Top problem areas we've covered. Junior enlisted soldiers were more likely than others to choose military practices and culture, as well as financial and legal issues. In terms of top types of help needed to address problems, there were several. Junior enlisted needed more help. And you can see here that there's an interpersonal flavor to a lot of the things that people are saying they need. In terms of write-ins of problems, they tended to fit into the existing categories that we had. But one thing that emerged was toxic and poor leadership and healthcare system challenges. Next slide. Of people with problems and needs, many are accessing many resources, so that's a sign that the Army system is working. 94% made military contacts. In general, across resources used, needs were adequately met, but 11% of soldiers responding to the survey reported at least one unmet need. In terms of barriers to service, some are well known and have been worked on for a while. The users of the chain of command, that was a little bit of a novel finding. They were concerned about career effects. How does this help? So military practices and culture is the most frequent problem area that people endorsed. Write-ins are speaking about things like toxic and poor leadership, but we're also getting at issues like not understanding how to use the system. In terms of toxic leadership, there were perceptions that leaders were uncaring, focused on their own career rather than their soldiers, and that there was a lack of mentoring, trust, and communication. There was not an item that really captured that. The closest we got was lack of proper guidance or sponsorship. Some of the perceived barriers related to the chain of command sort of speak to this theme and shed some light on the balancing act soldiers and their families can face when engaging their leadership in problem solving. Army resources were widely used, and for a given problem and need, soldiers typically sought several different resources, which suggests they might have trouble navigating the system, finding information about it, and navigating it. We got a closer perspective on that on some follow-on work that I'm not presenting here. Our recommendations tended to focus on helping leaders help their soldiers. So help them get connected to everything that's available for them and what that looks like. And that's part of communication being open and just help navigating. Sometimes leaders, especially junior leaders, are not as aware of the system yet because they haven't spent a life in the Army. So other things that might be considered include partnering with civilian organizations to help address things like capacity with the healthcare system, things like that. Now, one thing I didn't really speak to a lot, we asked soldiers for themselves and for their families. And some of the things that we found made us think, we're definitely asking soldiers here. It's really better to ask the spouses some of these questions. So our next step is to field a spouse survey, the Today's Army Spouse Survey. And it will be fielding this fall. If you're selected to participate, you will get a postcard in the mail. And there will be an incentive for your time. We'll have gift cards. So just in time for the holidays. So we'd like you to spread the word because it's important to get the spouse perspective on these kinds of things as well as soldiers' perspectives. So I think I have a little bit of time for questions. It will be online. You'll be mailed a postcard with you'll have a PIN to access it as you, and it'll be online. Non-military site. We don't have the site yet. It's not up yet, but the address will be on the postcard. 5.5% of write-ins. Total number of write-ins, I don't remember that off the top of my head. A lot of people found things that they felt were comfortable in the options that we provided. So if there are any copies of the report, it's bound to be in the 200 pages of the report back there.
Are these, oh, sorry.
Just randomly selected spouses that will be receiving it, correct?
Yeah, we will do a random selection of spouses.
And will it be including a total force where it's guard, active duty, and reserve, or?
In order to facilitate comparisons with the soldier survey that's gone before, at this time, we're not doing the total Army. But that's certainly something that we think would be important.
This is Kathy with Blue Star Families. Is this presentation available online? Can you share that with us?
The whole report, all 200 pages and some of it, is available online. Actually, I don't know if there are any sheets left, but the sheet with the link to the report, which is freely downloadable, is available. And I think we're about at time.
Or one more? One more?
One more? Oh.
Your questions sound like you're asking, you ask the soldier to talk about themselves and their family. Do you have the ability on some to drill down the healthcare piece, for example? It's important for Army leadership to know if it's soldiers having trouble accessing healthcare versus soldiers and families, or just families. The number was a little disturbing if you think that that's service members, if that's soldiers who can't access health care. So how can you, I don't know how you phrase the question, but can you comment just on how Army leadership can kind of drill down on some of these issues?
So we asked soldiers generally about problems that they and their families faced. And one of our category areas was healthcare system problems. So that was like trouble finding a time for an appointment, et cetera, things like that. So they endorsed those. Okay. And that included family members, helping family members get an appointment. I don't think that quite answers your question about whether or not it was. So there wasn't one
question that was just soldier specific. What's your experience in getting the healthcare help you need versus soldiers and families?
Right, it was soldiers and families pretty much.
Thank you.
Especially for the follow-on questions where we were asking about the problem areas. Thank you.
Dr. Sims, thank you so much. I really do truly believe you deserve a gold medal for going through half of your briefing without your slides, but you're a real trooper. Also, we will have the slides that folks allow us to put on our website at ausa.org under Military Families meetings, and you'll have access to all of the recordings of the forums as well as all the slides that were presented. Just so that you know. So we're going to take a quick stretch break. I don't want you leaving your chair. I just want you to stand up and stretch. Okay. Get a chance to stretch a little bit. There you go. All right. Because we're in for a real... Okay, terrific. You can sit back down now. All right. See, as soon as I let you all go, Okay, we're in for a real treat, and I'd love to be able to bring some folks up on the stage. So I'm going to ask all the command sergeant majors to come up on stage now with us. And they will be introduced by our moderator, who I will introduce to come up on stage.
That last question, I wasn't gonna. About the cat car? No. Morning, how are you?
How are you? I'm Patty Barron.
I'm David. Nice to meet you.
I'm freezing. All right, so we've got our CSMs up on stage. This is a real treat for us. My husband has always said the backbone of the Army are our NCOs, and I firmly believe that to be true. We have some very distinguished gentlemen and lady here on our podium, and they are going to be, this panel will be moderated by Sergeant Major Rodney J. Rhodes, who is the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the United States Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Installation Management. He assumed his duties as the Senior Enlisted Advisor on March 24th, 2016. Sergeant Major Rhodes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hey, good morning. Morning. So I know there's NCOs in the room, and that was really weak, so good morning. Good morning. Yeah, that's a whole lot better. So I can't see much out here with the light, so please forgive me if I don't look directly at you, but it is truly a pleasure to be here with you. So in front of you, you have representation from every leadership command pretty much that touches the initial entry training, the development, the care, while deployed, OCONUS from the total Army sitting to my left. So I really think that you're in for a treat, and you're going to get a very broad perspective of family readiness and how it is impacting our soldiers across the board. So thank you, Patty, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting this panel of sergeants majors to be here with us today to discuss soldier and family readiness. I am Sergeant Major Rodney Rhodes, and as Patty introduced, I have the privilege to work with Lieutenant General Bingham on a daily basis. But more important than that, I'm the father of a soldier. And that's probably one of the greatest things, greatest accomplishments, greatest experiences that I've had as a soldier. My son grew up living in Army housing with the support of Army family programs like after-school care, sports programs, youth center, lock-ins, and many others. Those programs were important, but they were only one very small part of the support that he and my missus and other families received. The other critical support came from family readiness groups, our neighbors, our military families, our surrounding communities that bonded together to ensure that our families were supported and cared for while we were training and deployed. After 3 years of college, and I wish he had decided earlier, while I was deployed, my son finally convinced his mom that the Army was where he belonged. When I returned home, we discussed the decision as a family. I was very proud of my son's decision, but I understood the concerns that his mother had. As I looked at my wife, I reassured her that the Army would ensure our son received the very best training, the very best leadership, and the very best equipment available. And beyond that, I couldn't promise anything. And for her, as a mother, that was enough. As we all know, people are the foundation. They are the bedrock of all that we do, soldiers, civilians, and families, and they are also the strength of our nation. As you've heard many times this week, the strategic environment in which the Army operates is changing. In addition, generational and technological change requires us to think differently about the soldiers and family services we provide and how we provide them. While we champion services for ready and resilient soldiers and families where they live, work, and play, we also continually assess soldier and family programs and optimize readiness. One of the Army's oldest installation partnerships, the Residential Communities Initiative, not the Army housing that my son grew up in, continues to thrive. In 2017, Soldiers at 85% of the Army installations surveyed rated the RCI program as good or outstanding. So for that 30% living on our installations, it's gotten much better. The number of installations rated outstanding has more than quadrupled in the last 2 years, and we got about a 92% occupancy. This is the third year in a row that we've seen increases in soldier and family satisfaction for those that live on base. As Dr. Sims' recent study found, religious and spiritual communities, personal networks, private doctors and counselors, private clubs and recreation resources off-post are 4 of the top 5 most requested services by soldiers. Did I get that right, ma'am? Thank you. 70% of our soldiers reside off base. So we must seek innovative ways to partner with communities and businesses to provide quality services for soldiers and our families. Amazon or similar on-demand services can deliver anything we want that we wait in line for today. Here in DC, Peapod, Blue Apron, and several other companies routinely deliver groceries to busy families. Starbucks, Subway, you can order via your app your meal and just wander on in and pick up your breakfast or your dinner, if that's what you like. We need to use these examples of innovation and many others to drive change in the way we provision services and the support we provide to our soldiers and families. On stage with me is a panel of Command Sergeants Major who get after the readiness of the total force each and every day by leading change for soldiers and their families. Together, they work tirelessly to improve the quality of life for our Army families. They champion the issues and concerns of our all-volunteer force and with their commanders. Following their opening remarks, I will lead us through the questions and answer session. Now let me introduce our distinguished panel of Command Sergeants Major who represent well over 130 years of combined Army service.
Well, they're old.
They are leaders that are on the ground each and every day training and developing our soldiers, our nation's sons and daughters. They are where the rubber meets the road with all things readiness. So with a quick introduction, to my immediate left we have Command Sergeant Major David Davenport, Sr., Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. To his immediate left, we have Command Sergeant Major Christopher Kepner, Command Sergeant Major of the National Guard. To his left, we have Command Sergeant Major Michael A. Grinston, Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Forces Command. Next to him, we have Command Sergeant Major Ted L. Copeland, Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Reserve Command. And finally, our overseas component, our overseas flavor to this panel. We have Command Sergeant Major Cheryl D. Lyon, Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Europe. So with that, Command Sergeant Major Davenport.
All right, well, thanks. I have to say, it's great that I'm the TRADOC Sergeant Major, but after the couple of days up here, I'm probably known as Claudia's husband, so that's a title I'm most proud of. So I just came from leading the Sergeant Major of the Army discussion about future of how we're going to develop NCOs, and that was a lot less scary than talking to you all about families, so bear with me. But I am thankful for the opportunity to share a couple of ideas or thoughts about, I think, what NCOs are really known for. And what we really are known for is taking care of soldiers and their families. It goes without saying that in the TRADOC formation, we have soldiers serving in some very key but unique jobs in our Army, such as drill sergeants, recruiters, ROTC instructors, and of course, those require greater flexibility in our family and community programs in terms of operating hours, costs, and of course, the ability to react to a very dynamic environment that we live in TRADOC. Today, like any other day inside of TRADOC, drill sergeants began the day by waking up those young trainees, getting them ready for PT, usually 4:30, 5 o'clock-ish. But some of those drill sergeants are single parents, and they serve as the early man, as we call it in the drill sergeant community. They're the ones that have to come in and do that initial wake up to get those soldiers moving. So that requires their children need to have the ability to go to the CDC a little bit earlier than others. Our recruiters began the morning by going out and finding that talent that we need to sustain our Army by going to various gyms where we buy them community memberships, because they're spread out in over 1,200 different locations across our country. And they just can't go to the local post to go to the gym or do platoon PT. So we need programs that understand the uniqueness of what we do in TRADOC. So we do have to accept some certain level of risk in our separated organization, recruiters, drill sergeants, and ROTC soldiers and their families. But we need that access to those programs, and we need access to them to work around the challenges that we face. This little unique. And of course, the Guard and Reserve have theirs as well. But really, I need to understand of what we're asking the men and women in TRADOC to do. I don't think that we can do a cookie-cutter approach. And when we're walking into the last presentation, you know, I had a whole set of remarks that I was going to use, but you're exactly right. It's about finding the best practices, finding out what works, sharing that so there's a common understanding so that our soldiers know how to plug into it to use those resources. So I'll just stop there, because that, I think, is what will make the TRADOC teammates resilient. I think that's what will help their soldiers and our families, is finding those resources that have value. How do we plug into it, and how do we share that word so our soldiers, as they go about their daily job in TRADOC?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Command Sergeant Major Kepner, and I'm the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chief National Guard. And so I just want to talk a little bit this morning for my 5 minutes about some anecdotal examples and some of the challenges that we see as National Guardsmen when we talk about access to benefits and things like that. And I just, I couldn't help, or I was listening to the previous question about access to health care, and I thought, you know, that's a great segue into really kind of what I want to talk about, which is a real challenge for our guardsmen when they deploy for a number of reasons. And, you know, when you talk to soldiers, it's really one of their biggest concerns whenever they deploy, because you know, while TRICARE works very well around large urban areas or around places where there's large military installations, when you get into rural Pennsylvania or rural Nebraska, there aren't many doctors that accept it, and it's difficult. So many of our soldiers have to change their medical coverage whenever they deploy with TRICARE. And that's one of the things, you know, that General Engel and General Cadavy are really looking at is how do we help our soldiers with that, with the geographic dispersion of our units and getting access to that health care. And so for 27 years, I was a traditional M-Day soldier, not full-time. I worked for Schneider National, and so I just have to share this with you as an example. So whenever I deployed, I live in rural Pennsylvania, and I was at the Moab site, and you know, so I had to transfer into TRICARE, and my wife calls me and she says, "Hey, I got this thing in the mail from TRICARE, and we need to change our doctor," and they assigned me a doctor in Manhattan. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Call the doctor in Manhattan." So Mrs. Kepner calls the doctor in Manhattan, and she says, "Hey, we just got assigned here." And she said, "By the way, where is Manhattan, Pennsylvania anyway?" And as Mrs. Kepner relays the story, the lady on the other end said, "This is Manhattan, New York. Is that a problem?" To which my wife told me, the conversation went south pretty quick after that. So I can't really relay exactly what she said, but those are just some of the examples that we have that's just one example of the challenges that we have when we think about our guardsmen and how geographically dispersed that we are. And I sort of want to dovetail on to one of the things that Sergeant Major Davenport and Sergeant Major Rhodes had said, As we look at the problems of family readiness and family support to a force that is very geographically dispersed, even within our own companies, there are communities. You know, we have guardsmen oftentimes traveling 3 and 4 hours. And so those families are even separated. And so we have family action centers that do a great job, but it's difficult to get to all of the rural areas for our guardsmen to make sure that they have access to that. And to Sergeant Major Davenport's point and Sergeant Major Rose, we really got to look at different ways to get to those soldiers and their families whenever we're deployed as well. And it's something that we're always thinking about from a guard perspective. So I'll just hold there then. And Sergeant Major.
Well, good morning. And I want to say, first of all, I'm proud to be a United States soldier serving in the United States Army Forces Command, because I know the strength of our nation is our Army. The strength of our Army is our soldiers, and the strength of our soldiers are our families. So I will start off with say thank you for your service. So most of the spouses in this room have been in the military probably a lot. You know, there's probably 30 or 40 years worth of service in one individual sitting in this crowd right now. And oftentimes we don't say thank you for your support and service that you have served your nation. And I just want to say on behalf of all the Forces Command and my spouse who could not be here, thank you for your service. So let's see, I've got a slide. I'm an overachiever, I guess. Just want to say that. And I'm going to, before I even say anything else, I'm going to challenge you to give us really hard questions at the end. And there is no question that you can stump this panel, because if I can't answer it, Sergeant Major Davenport will. I have thrown out the gauntlet already because his spouse is right there. Okay, and I really want to tell you, listening to a little bit of the other brief before, how the information goes. This is, and I'm the classic soldier, so my wife gets no information from me. Just like all the others, everybody in here is going, yep, Sergeant Major, you're not alone. So that's why all the photos of the families are so important. And what you do is so important, and how we share information. But it really, we don't understand how value your input is. And I can tell you from my own failures to tell my spouse anything, that your information and how you interact with the families at all levels is extremely important. And I know we talked about sponsorship, but I think over the years when we talk about deployments, we have to really define that. And I'm just going to talk about that in a minute. Because our readiness is very important. It's the #1 priority. And when you look at some of the issues and the slides in the RAND study, and what was, a lot of that was, you know, dealing with family problems. And we got to look at that. And one of the things she talks about was toxic leadership. And again, I ground everything in a little bit of story, so don't think poorly of me. So my wife one time was, she was working, and she never put her last name on her desk. She would never do that. And then one day, one of the soldiers found out that, you know, I was her husband, and she looks at him and goes, "But you're so nice." Okay. Then why did I put that with toxic leadership? I don't know. Okay. But you won't forget that story. What I'm saying is that sometimes spouses really do need to be approachable, and they can bring some readiness issues, I think, to the other side of that equation that is invaluable. And your leadership at all levels is very important, and it can help us. And then we have another slide. Next slide. And here's why. We still have 180,000 people spread across the world. And I think I need to say that all the time, because when we define some of the problems of our readiness, nowadays we only think, sometimes people will say, well, they're deployed. I heard it already, deployed. But what does that mean? It means different. For most of everybody in this room, it only means one thing. My spouse is gone. But to other leaders in the world, when they say deployed, they think Iraq and Afghanistan. So as we've pulled people back to the continent United States, and then we forward deployed them, and they do 9 months in this area, or they do 9 months in Korea, all you know is there's a same deployment. But the entitlements sometimes are different depending on the region that you go to. And I'm sure you've talked about those. But that's part of the problem, is because all we hear is deployment and my spouse is gone. But we say we have to be ready now, and it takes a lot of communication because of these issues, and we need you more than ever to talk about these issues and where they're going, because the entitlements may be different. So I just wanted to show that slide as a reminder of how far we've gone. And again, I welcome those hard questions to Sergeant Major Davenport. Thank you.
Good morning. Name's Ted Copeland, Command Sergeant Major of America's Army Reserve, your Army Reserve. A lot of things to talk about, but I tell you, I like to dovetail a little bit on FORSCOM. We're almost 199,000 soldiers and families across 24 time zones. Some are deployed forward, some just live there. As Lieutenant General Lucky likes to say, we're in 7/8 of the Earth's surface. So, you know, same with the National Guard, we had that disperse problem. You know, over my history of my 30-some years, a lot of it being in the Army Reserve, we all know we enlist soldiers, but we will really re-enlist families. That's how important it is for our soldiers and our families. You know, we have a unique problem. You know, I've heard all the panels talk about being dispersed. Ours is a day-to-day problem. Most of our soldiers travel hours. You know, most of our senior soldiers now are traveling states, 4 or 5 states to their battle assemblies. And it's a really hard challenge for our families. You know, most of our families have children, full-time jobs, school events. So to ask a spouse and family to either get in a car and drive 3 states or get on an airplane, which is very expensive, and go to a battle assembly because of a family readiness group, it's kind of unrealistic. So that challenge is difficult, and we've had it for years. We know it's always extremely important when that unit gets alerted 10 months out, hey, you're going to deploy forward, and then it becomes very critical to us. But we have to figure out a better way ahead. As the Army Reserve moves from an operational to, or a strategic to an operational force, what does that really mean? It means the readiness requirements go up, so it's more time, month to month. You know, 2 days a month is probably not happening for anybody anymore. 2 weeks in the summer is probably not happening for anybody anymore, even the lowest ranking soldier. But it also means quicker mobilization time frames. So from the time, you know, the unit gets alerted to the time the unit's leaving, it's very short. You know, those 6 months, 10 months, not going to happen for a lot of our units now. It's going to be, could be as quick as a week from the time they get the phone call at home, they turn around and tell their spouse, I'm leaving, and they're going to be gone 2 or 3 days later. So there's a real problem that as we're moving forward into the you know, operational world, is how do we really get the word out to our family members just how important this is to us. Our soldiers are busy. We know, as our major says, they don't talk to their spouses. I was one of those. She'd ask, I'd tell her. She don't ask, I don't tell her. That's just, you know, it's not because I didn't want her to know, but you know, we had a good agreement. She wanted to know, she'd ask. I'm more than happy to tell you, but you know, usually when I got home, she wanted to talk about what the kids did today, and you know, and how I'm responsible for it. You know, so I didn't bring up that, because then she just looked at me like, well, my day was different. So how do we get that out? And I'm not sure how it's going to work. I need that help. So as we move forward with this, you know, I will talk to soldiers. Of course, that's what Command Sergeant Majors do, but I'm going to try to really talk to family members, because that's where we really get the truth, not the truth, but really get what's needed. We are looking at something real quick, and it's just starting to be in the pilot phase, as we're calling it. We're not sure what the final name's going to be, but the initial name's Zip Code Based Family Readiness. We're not sure exactly what that means yet. Our 108th Train Command is going to be piloting it soon, so we're not sure how the geographical area is going to be, how big, but we're going to break the command in areas. The senior unit that has a family readiness coordinator will lead that family readiness group, and we're going to try to connect families geographically. So that way, a family don't have to try to pack up and move 8 states to a family readiness group. So that's kind of still in the initial phase, so we're going to really test it out and see how big or how small that area is going to be. I would have to assume it's going to have to be pretty small geographically, because otherwise we're just right back to the distance and time and travel and around families' time. So that's coming, and that's something we're really going to work hard on to try to really get after our families being very involved, or at least as much as their busy lives will allow. So appreciate the few minutes. Those hard questions, please ask the others. I'll try to answer, but I'll be the first one to tell you if I don't know. I'm not going to try to tell you something I don't know. I'll just say I don't know, and I'll figure it out. So thank you.
Okay, I guess that means that I'm next. Thank you, Ms. Barron and Sergeant Major Rhodes, for having all of us here. As I look across the audience, one of the things that I see is part of one of the best assets that we have, and that is our family readiness and those who make it happen. So without you, we are not a success. And I do have to admit, I'm one of the anomalies, because I have pretty much so been a single soldier my whole career. Although I brought a daughter up, and apparently, as someone mentioned earlier, it must be a pretty good life, because my daughter has followed in my footsteps and is now serving in the military also. But as a part of USRER, our mission is to assure our allies and partners of all of Europe, to include parts of AFRICOM now, as well as parts of CENTCOM when the need is required. We have assets all over the place, like many of my counters here, many of my peers. And so I'm the entity that uses the TRADOC assets, that uses the reserve assets, that uses the National Guard assets, and uses the FORSCOM assets to make our mission happen in Europe. So 5 to 7 years ago, Europe was downsizing. And a few years ago, in 2014 to be precise, we saw that there was a need to remain strong in Europe. And so we had to switch gears and change from downsizing to resizing and to maintaining what we had. Well, that in itself created a challenge for United States Army Europe. And the reason why I say that is back in the heyday of Europe, and some of you might remember this, there were upwards of 300,000 soldiers and family members all over Europe. You couldn't turn without seeing a sign to a caserna. Now that is not the case. You see the signs where those casernas were located, but there's no longer a base there. So we are down to 7 garrison assets managing 99 entities, and they are spread from northern Germany, of course, Wiesbaden be the highest, which is where I'm at in the headquarters of USRER, down to Italy. So those are still there. But the other thing that we have are that we have small teams, we have small companies, size elements that are dispersed throughout Europe, and we have soldiers and their families who are all the way from the northern Scandinavian countries down to Turkey, to Great Britain on the west, as far as Ukraine on the east. So it takes a small army to make that happen, and with only 30,000 soldiers left in Europe, I have to use the assets of all these individuals sitting to my right. So we depend upon them greatly. And as I mentioned, it creates a challenge when you bring those entities in. Now, the only one who really has a need or a requirement for family readiness on our side of the pond, of course it is here back on this side of the pond, is the reservists, because they will stay with us for an extended amount of time. They will go active for upwards of 3 years at a time, and we rely upon them heavily. So our set is a little different in Europe, and I have to admit that one of the things that I find best about this as I listen to everyone talk is when we identify the needs, so identifying the needs is part of it, but taking the action to make the requirement or meet the requirement of the challenges that we face. For instance, and I'll give you a few. You're moving to a new country, right? You don't live at home anymore. The first challenge that you face, now thankfully we usually fly in Patriot Express with our families to include the pets and everything else. But many times you will find the first big challenge is that you're in a foreign country, needing to speak a foreign language or at least understand it and to understand a foreign culture. And those have significant impacts, especially on young single soldiers or young families moving for the first time out of the United States. So that is the first challenge that they face when they come to United States Army Europe. USER PAC, I would assume, I won't speak on their behalf, but I'm pretty sure they face some of the same challenges. Geographical dispersion, we have all mentioned it, and as I said, we're from the far north to the south, east, and west. And in any of those, they speak a different language at any of those different locations. Small teams that do not have FRGs where they are at, who depend upon our State Department when they go into work to be received by them, to integrate them into the communities and help them assimilate, and so that they can be contributing members. But one of the greatest challenges, and somebody else already mentioned it, is medical care. How do you provide medical care to soldiers and their families in locations where there is not an Army or military hospital? You depend upon a different number of things. And as I talked about innovation, one of the things that we have seen and MedCom has promoted is telemed. So soldiers or family members will get on modern technology on a video conference with a doctor, and so naturally they can see each other and they can present cases, things that they're experiencing, and they can give them feedback. And that doctor or the PA or whoever might be on the other side on the other camera can determine at that point whether that soldier or the family member needs to be pulled back for further treatment or whether they have what is available to them right there. So telemed has been a great benefit to us in Europe with our dispersion to help take care of our soldiers and their families. So when I mention innovation, we have been truly, truly blessed by people not saying, oh, that's a problem, I don't know how we're going to fix it, but oh, that is a problem, let's fix it. And they immediately address it, and they have made some monumental advances in things that take care of us. Another is specialty care. We are down to one hospital in all of USER, and that is Landstuhl, which is still functioning. But for some of our soldiers, that's an 8-hour trip to get to Landstuhl for treatment. You're not going to make an 8-hour trip. For our mothers, our spouses, if you're having a child, you're not going to make it to Landstuhl to have your baby unless you know exactly when it's coming. You are going to go on the local economy to deliver your baby. So many young couples are sometimes uncomfortable with that, but I will tell you that we have some of the best medical assets out there available to us. It's more of a intrepidation about not being able to speak or communicate exactly what you're feeling and thinking with that person who is providing you medical care. But I will guarantee you that they are some of the best in the world. One of the other things about United States Army Europe is being proactive. With the downsizing, we lost many assets. We are able to take care of our families, and we do our best that we can by them, but we have to pre-screen exceptional family members. We oftentimes do not have the assets available to take care of them. So therefore, the number of folks who can come to us is limited and restricted. So we have to know ahead of time and make sure that we are taking care of the families for sure, and those exceptional family members with what they need. Okay? So just one last thing. The other thing, spousal employments. because of agreements that we have, all spouses who want to work don't always have the opportunity. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and like I said, we have lots of individuals who are working endeavors for us to take care of those things. So I have been cut off. Time is up very nicely, but thank you all again for being here.
So a round of applause for our Okay. So we're going to pause real quick while they change the tape. But while they're changing the tape, you know, I'm going to follow Sergeant Major Grinston's lead and say that my wife has told me many, many times that the life of a soldier is easy. It is the family members who pick up the slack and take on 4, 5, 6, 20 different tasks while we're deployed and focused on our duties and responsibilities. So with that, can I get a round of applause for our family members, please? So I've got some questions already that the team brought up from Facebook. If you have a question, please raise your hand and the team will bring you a mic. I'm going to hit these couple questions real quick because I think they're pretty good ones for the panel to answer. And the first one, I've heard this many, many times over my career. I am an FRG leader for a company. How can I get our young soldiers to provide information to their families? So, who would like to start?
I got it. I threw down the gauntlet just because how can I get more information to our families? My wife and I actually talked about this several times. You know, do you make it fun? How do you bring people together? And how do you make it, you know, worth the while to get information to the spouses? Well, sometimes it was having a fun activity. It's and some people say, well, that's not the purpose of the FRG. It's information only. I can understand that because my term is like this. So, but how do you get the soldier motivated to bring it home? I don't think I've ever solved that problem. I think it's still going to have to go through spouses and the family readiness groups, and then they have to get the information. There are so many. Especially, you know, you got the question through Facebook, but there's Facebook pages. We hold the community update briefs. Every senior installation that I've been on has a community update brief. They just have to attend those briefings, get that information, because it's all available. Sometimes it's too much information, but the information is there. If you attend some of the things, you can get it off Facebook, and then they'll announce when they're having those community updates. But that's probably the best source that I've found to get most of your post-wide information is the community update briefs.
Yeah, Tony's exactly right. It's the environment of encouraging to participate, to get them there, get them involved, get them engaged. And, you know, it starts with that command teams, whether it's company, battery, troop level, battalion, brigade, et cetera. Just get them in, set an environment where they want to be a part of, and inclusion, you know, really. You want the very best for them. So once they feel that, I think that they'll more likely want to be a part of something like that, other than just getting browbeated about, here's your slide deck.
Anybody else? Okay, second question. How do you make, and this is very similar, and this is coming from Fort Hood. The previous came from Fort Myer. How do you make soldiers voluntarily provide family contact information? So before, I'd like to start with Sergeant Major Kempner or Sergeant Major Copeland to get a different perspective.
So whoever asked that question, they said, how do you make soldiers voluntarily?
I read it exactly how it came in.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that means voluntarily. Look, hey, I'll be quite honest with you. In the Army National Guard, we have soldiers who are owed a retirement and don't give us information to reach them to get their retirement benefits. And so I'm not sure how you crack the nut with a 22-year-old young man or woman to say, hey, you know, give us this information. But I do want to say this. So I was talking to a platoon sergeant one time about how do we communicate with our soldiers between drills, because that's very, very key. And he told me something that I thought was pretty profound. He said, you know what, Sergeant Major? He said, for the National Guard, he said, Facebook is the barracks. And I thought about that for a little bit, and he's right. I believe that for us, that communication piece has to be in other methods besides face-to-face. And so as I go around and I talk to people, what I will tell you is the most successful leaders and the most successful FRGs for us have done something like establish social media venues for that communication piece. And once that's out there, people participate in that. But as far as making somebody voluntarily give you information, I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I'd actually like to pile on, because we talked about it, sponsorship. Sometimes the way we're asking the question is maybe going about it the wrong way. It's not actually making them voluntary. Just, a technique. We get so busy, and really at the company battery troop level, we got to find some time where it says, hey, I'm going to come out to, I would like to come out to your house. And I'm not doing an inspection. I want to visit to say, welcome to my organization. And then at that point, normally they're going to give you the phone number and the address. It's amazing. But normally, normally they say no. I very rarely had somebody say, nope, you cannot come by and say, welcome to my organization. That's never happened. So it's how we present ourselves that I think we need to do better. We just got to take some time to say, I want to welcome you to my organization, and I'd like to stop by. And then you'll normally have all the communication means that you need, but it's how you present it. If you sit back in your office, you're so busy, and you don't want to reach out the first time, and you say, give me your spouse information, then sometimes I found they to be very reluctant in that case. Over to you.
I think for some of our family members, it's a scary proposition. They've not been tied to the military before. They're not sure what you're going to be asking, and they're not sure what that interaction is going to be. So, we always try to, in the military, rely on, it's leadership. Yeah, sitting down with a soldier, spelling it out, talking to them. I found a lot of times, well, give me their cell phone number. We're not going to call them. We'll send a text. And just kind of send a text, hey, welcome to the unit. Usually you get a better result. Now if you start using that text for general broadcasting and put out a lot of information, sometimes some of these families are very separated from the military, will really shrink. But I think you got to phase it in. You got to kind of welcome them in a little bit, like Tony said, but just slowly, because I've really seen that when families are very far away, they just don't know anything about the military. They're a little scared of the military. What is going to be asked? They're afraid they're going to be asked to do something. And well, it's true. Asked to do something that they won't know much about. So it's a slow process. It's kind of, it's the chicken and the egg thing. Which comes first? You got to have the program to bring the families in. But if you can't bring the families in to start the program, so it's a challenge. I'm not sure if nobody I know has ever cracked it.
We call it strategic messaging and buy-in. And it kind of resounds with what both Tony said and Sergeant Major Copeland. You want that family to have buy-in, but it's also what the soldier tells them when they go home. This is what we're looking for, and this is what we're doing, and this is why it's important.
And I can't be the only one not to speak, so one of the things that we're doing in our education system, and especially at the young sergeant level, everyone has a sergeant, is we're teaching them the value of these programs. There's a whole section of training now that we're going to incorporate just on Army programs so that they have the ability to not necessarily know everything, but be familiar enough so when they present a problem, knowing how to plug in. And in our communications model that we're putting in place, we're teaching them how to adjust their leadership styles, not to be the demanding type, but really set the conditions in order to really get to know their soldiers. And I would say that would even expand to their families.
Okay, so I have two more questions here from Facebook. Before I read this, I want to take a couple questions from the audience, because I think we still have about 20 minutes, and I think we're good. So first question from the audience. Ma'am.
Yes, my name is Denise Lambert. I'm a proud Army Reserve military spouse, and I wanted to talk about the military spouse employee partnership. Last week, I was able to be a part of the induction ceremony, and how you all can help to further that to for those spouses that want to work. What a great program that is. So, and I encourage everyone to look that up, Military Spouse Employee Partnership. Great program.
Anybody want to respond? I think it was
I
more
want
of
to
a
talk to her
statement.
afterwards, so I can
Okay.
see where it's over in Oconus also.
Okay. Any more questions from the audience? I want to take one more before I read the other two Facebook. Back here to my right. Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kelly Koppelman, and I had a question since we've got such an august panel here. For those units that are compiled overseas as YS taskers, so they have soldiers who are from each of your units, FORSCOM, TRADOC, National Guard, Reserves, they even have Marines and Navy and whatnot. What have you found that works best for family readiness? You know, do they maybe rely on their home stations, or do they create maybe a Facebook virtual family readiness? What have you seen that works best?
I go ahead and start. We had, I think the best model is twofold. They really need to link in with the unit that is deployed, and normally the unit that deploys that they go on those YS taskers will have their Facebook page. As when I deployed, and one of the many times I deployed, we had several. It was an SFAB model, so we had people come in TDY from all over, and we had our own Facebook page, and they joined it. But then we needed to know their location, because there was some support group that they would have back here, but if they deploy out of a unit and that unit's not deployed, so no one else can go through that. They're not going through the same emotions. So linking in with the social network of the unit deployed, but also reminding, that's why I keep hammering on that slide over and over, is that we have to remind everybody, you may be sitting right next to a person and their spouse is gone and they're going through so many different emotions that you just don't understand. So that's why I keep throwing up that second slide about how many people we do have forward. But in my opinion, is linking in with the unit that is forward deployed in their social media networks, and then kind of just reminding everybody that you have a soldier that's out there too. That's just the technique I've seen work. Over.
And so I agree with Tony. It's that combination, you kind of supporting a relationship. So yeah, they are forward deployed on a YS testing, and when we give our soldiers to other units, we want them to be integrated, just like that leadership wraps our arms around them as well. So we want them to be integrated, a part of that support system, but we also want them to know that we still got them when they come back home. We're still looking after for their families. So it's that combination, I think, that you strive to have for YS taskings.
I think for us, it's really the local units that the soldiers have been a part of, and the units that are still back in the states that really the families begin to depend on, and of course I think they do a very, very good job. The units do a very, very good job at reaching out when we have soldiers deployed like that, because everybody knows that in that local unit, and so I would say that's our biggest support mechanism there.
It's a combination. Home unit's probably the best because we're not near post most of the time. But that's up to that soldier again. If that soldier walked his family into that home unit before they took off to go across the state somewhere to hook up with that unit deploying, if you really walk your spouse in, meet the full-time individuals that are sitting in those reserve centers, that's the key. We know the command leadership's important, but the full-time, unit administrator, the trained NCO, the personnel sergeant is the key for us in the Army Reserves, because they're there. Now, of course, they may not know everything, but at least it's a point of contact. We do have a system called Fort Family, and there's an 800 number that you can call in the Army Reserve, and they'll help connect you to resources locally, which helps. But I'm not sure there's ever a great it's a combination, but I think I'm with Sergeant Major Kepner. Our home unit has to be that continuity that'll take charge, you know, really care about your family, because if the other headquarters and that home unit's in California, you're in Pennsylvania or Ohio, they care about you, but you're just not there. They don't know what's local for you. So.
Okay, so next question from Stephanie that's coming from Fort Hood. Commanders see FRLs as essentially a forced tasking and not an asset to enhance family readiness until a disaster or crisis happens, and then they are reactive in nature to the disaster. How do we change this culture of thought?
Shame on them. Yeah, because that's not the purpose of them, and I don't know if that's a culture or a particular leadership challenge, but they have someone above them, and the way I look at it, and I don't want to get emotional about it, but it's their duty to let the next higher leader know that that's going on, or that's how the view of the program is in that organization. I mean, that it's just hard for me to believe that that's a culture in our Army. We've been at this for so long, and we've gone through so much as an Army. To say that that's in our culture, I just disagree. I think that's a particular leader that needs to be addressed to the next level chain of command.
And so I would agree with Sergeant Major Davenport. I've seen some very successful family readiness groups that don't feel forced. So I don't agree necessarily that it's in our culture that it's forced. I think I think that's an individual unit thing. But I would disagree that from what I have seen, I don't believe it is cultural across our formation.
Okay, I'm gonna throw in some controversy here, and Sergeant Major Davenport knows I like to do this every once in a while. So I'm gonna kind of slightly disagree. Is that it's part of what I said it, and General Abrams says it all the time. We say ready now, but we've gotten used to a lad. You know, this is when my spouse will deploy on this date, and until then, I don't have to worry about anything. And then when they come back, okay, it's just human nature. When I come back, you know, okay, I ground everything in a good story, right? So my wife sends me a note, I'm deployed, and she says, oh, when do you come back? And I said, yeah, I should be back by this time. And she said, okay, that's great. Well, I just need you to watch the kids because I'm going to go run the Rome Marathon. I was like, okay, that's not how I saw that conversation coming. I thought she'd be excited that I'm going to be back. But she was. You're recording this, and I'll be in trouble later. But the reason I say that is because sometimes when the spouse comes back, where you had that close tie to someone before because it was a friendship and a bond, now you're going to reconnect with your family member. So those FRG ties were like super tight, and everybody was ready to go. And when I came back, you know, we kind of separated, and then the spousal ties weren't as strong. But now we're saying ready now. And that's that mindset that I don't think we've completely transitioned to. Ready now means I need to have my FRG ready now. And I can't wait till the lad comes up and I've got that crisis. So I agree that, yeah, it's part of the leadership, but some of this is us in this room, is that we have to build these systems so when it becomes a crisis, it's not really a crisis. You got the plan. Even when the spouse is there, that you do take the time to attend those meetings. But I know as soon as everybody comes back, when everybody's deployed, the attendance in the meeting is way up, right? And when everybody comes back, the attendance of the meetings are what? They're very low. So I acknowledge that there's some leadership there, but again, we have to continuously beat the drum because you don't know when the next one's going to come. And that's the difference between sustained readiness model and, you know, R4Gen, where you knew you were going 9 months. So this is when I can click the button on and I'll be gone. So that's a long explanation of that, but I think there is some fundamental mental changes in all the leadership's mindset of being ready now. And yes, there's some fault in the leadership, but I think for all of us, we have to continuously beat those drums of what those folks and the different mindset of that is.
So we're going to show you a glimpse behind how things get done at the Sergeant Major Army meetings. So, what you said, I agree about sustained readiness. We need sustainment in our FRGs. Yes. You know, that needs to be a part of our culture, regardless of what cycle, because it's ready tonight. I mean, it's a readiness issue. Commanders and first sergeants don't focus on the PT test a week before. They have a PT program that they work on. Whether it's doing the WAD of the day or the Army doctrine. So if we're going to be serious about caring for our families, we need to have a sustainable family readiness group that's not seen as forced fun. How's that?
Yep.
If I could add also, the FRLs are a part, or have been for me in the past, a part of that command and staff meetings on a regular basis. As both have mentioned, you don't wait until the day before you leave to make them a part of that. You keep them there as a part of that the whole time. That way, when a crisis does occur, they've already been integrated, and you're not doing it at the last minute. So that's buy-in again from the command teams to make that happen.
Okay, so do I have any more questions from the audience? Because we have 5 minutes. I have 3 more questions here. Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kathy Hurley, and I'm from Fort Lee. Recently, I worked at a school system out of Fort Bragg, and about 5 or 6 years ago, the Army did one of the best programs I think they've ever done, which is the Army Youth Programs in Your Neighborhood, APIN. But right now, those programs are only at major installations with a high percentage of military children. Do you know if that program will ever be expanded? Because just because you're at a smaller post doesn't mean that the children still don't need, after-school activities. Are you familiar with the program?
I am not.
Is deep. Ma'am, please. I know I have my subject matter experts in here.
I can tell you all about it.
Ma'am, you are right. The programs are only at designated installations where there are capacity issues. We can certainly look at our metrics for where those programs are located and see if there's a need at a place like Fort Lee to go ahead and institute that program. But
when you only have 20 to 30% of your families living on post, it's not very easy for a mom or dad who works to get their kid to the youth center on post by 4:30 to go to karate. You see what I'm saying?
Understand.
So, I understand that there's a limited amount of funds, but when you're, you have a very small percentage of military families living on post that probably utilize those after-school activities on a weekly basis. And that's why I was just wondering if it will ever be expanded, because I think it's the best thing that the Army's ever done.
right, it's a very successful program. You are correct, and there are about 3,000 children now who take part in that across the Army. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at expanding our metrics and seeing what we can do in some of those smaller locations.
Okay, so real quick, we have one question here, and then I'll come to the audience member. So for the Guard and Reserve, what are you doing to ensure that your soldiers take blended retirement system option training? This is specific for Guard and Reserve.
It's mandatory, and we have to report it. I mean, that's for us. Yeah, we. It's mandatory to take. So and we're being checked.
Okay.
So yeah, that's an easy answer, I think.
Yeah, we're very concerned. There's 174,000 Army reservists that can opt in that has to have the training. The main system of record is joint JKO. So we understand in our world, not all the soldiers have a CAT card reader at home on their computer to get on JKO. So we're doing more mass training, but in the classroom. How we're reporting it is not 100% clear, so we're a little behind. And of course, we owe this. So it's something that the CG and I are very concerned with, and we're really trying to get after. My biggest concern is even after the training, I took it, and I'm still confused. So I told the boss, I said, I'm really concerned because we don't have the post to go to a counselor that really knows what the system is. We hired some. They're located at our RSCs, which there's 4 of them. So trying to call in, get to that person, it's just another one of those dispersed problems that we're dealing with. So we know it's a problem. We're working hard at it because it can be a real big life decision. That our young 20-some-year-olds, you know how that is. So.
And I just want to illustrate one of the challenges for us too, for things like that. From a Guard and Reserve perspective, we had the same suspense date as the active component. We had 1 year. So for us, that means we have 39 days to get 100% of our force trained, which is a significant difference. So, you know, we're intimately aware of that requirement.
Thank you, gentlemen. So, sir, I want to come out here. This gentleman had his hand up. You want to go back there? Okay, ma'am, go. We have 1 minute.
Okay, you may or may not know, I've done many live town halls across the force once a quarter to talk about the changes that we're doing to how we're going to develop them, assign them, remind them of their role in our Army. We've touched over 4 million social media accounts. And I will tell you that I learned something every time that we did it. Thought that we had it right, would get data to back up we were doing it right, and then just a comment would come in on a chat board or a question like, wow, we didn't think of that. So personally, from where I sit, they're very valuable, especially as you look at things over and over again, those fresh set of eyes, but more importantly, through the eyes of those young soldiers and those young family members. I think you will be surprised in what you learn.
I've done a few, and I probably haven't done as many as Sergeant Major Davenport, but I really see the value in it. But there's one thing that I don't like is that you can't see emotion and feelings in a social media chat room. And I value emotions because your facial expressions and your mannerisms usually tell me more about the question than just typing the words. So I really, it's a great technique, but I don't think it should be the only issue, because what you said was a sensitive topic. A sensitive topic written in a question form, you don't see the emotion, and sometimes you can't relate that there's a family member behind that. And that these are people, and their lives matter. And sometimes you can't get that when you do it through a social media or a VTC. And that's why, again, you know, you heard me talk about sponsorship and getting to see your folks, because then when you see their emotions, I think sometimes you put a little, especially on the harder issues, it's hard to express that passion that you have, and you can't convey the right things. So I think there's a great value in to reach millions. But when it comes our time, I like to do a little bit of a face-to-face on the difficult
So we're out of time. And remember, Dr. Sims mentioned early that our soldiers look for 5 to 7 different venues to gather information, to look for different approaches. So I'd ask you to remember that. We'll collect the questions that were out here in the audience. We had 2 others on Facebook that we'll get back. One was to Sergeant Major Lyon about victim advocacy services, and then another one to Sergeant Major Davenport about how he's training our AIT soldiers on family resources and support before they leave their training. So with that, team, can I get one more round of applause for our panel? It's been a pleasure to share the last hour with you. Have a great afternoon.